Hey guys, tonight we're stepping into a world of mist music and mystery. A place where the trees sway to a rhythm older than any human beat. And somewhere deep in that jungle thicket, something sings. Not beautifully, mind you. This isn't a choir you'd want on your playlist. Picture a cross between a saxophone caught in a tree and your neighbor's kid learning violin at full volume. That's what greets you here in the dense forest of ancient Madagascar. You crane your neck as shadows glide across the treetops, and then a chorus, echoing howls, trills and screeches that somehow sound organized and totally wrong at the same time. Welcome to the world of the singing lemurs. They're gone now, of course, extinct, lost to time shrinking forests, and let's be honest, questionable musical taste. But once these creatures were the divas of Madagascar. Fluffy, awkward, incredibly loud, and weirdly important to the forest rhythm. And tonight, you're going to meet them. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, let me know in the comments where you're listening from and what time it is there. It's always fun to see this sleepy community from all over the world. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum. And let's ease into tonight's journey together. You start in darkness. Not the metaphorical kind, actual can't see your hands darkness. The kind that blankets a forest before dawn, thick and full of secrets. Madagascar, thousands of years ago, is still wild. No coffee plantations, no villages, no eco-lodges. Just endless trees and creatures you've never seen before, blinking back at you from the undergrowth. Something moves overhead. Not a bird. Bigger. Fluffier. You squint and catch sight of a long tail dangling like a lacy question mark from a branch. Then comes the sound, a drawn-out wail like someone dragging their voice over gravel. It's answered by a few more farther away. You've just been introduced to the original dawn chorus. And spoiler alert, it's not exactly soothing. These lemurs, long extinct, once ruled the acoustic landscape. Bigger than any living lemur today, the singing lemurs had a voice to match their size. Historians and scientists still argue whether they were descendants of Endangered, the largest living lemurs known for their eerie, high-pitched songs, or if they were something weirder entirely. What's clear is this: they were loud. Like wake up the entire forest loud. And you're lucky. You've arrived during the breeding season, which means performances. In this quiet moment before sunrise, you feel the air change. There's anticipation like the forest is holding its breath. Then one lemur lets loose a low bubbling sound. Another answers with something that sounds like an enthusiastic goat impression. Soon it builds into a full-on cacophony, calls, bouncing off tree trunks, threading through vines, weaving a strange, sonic net. If you were here thousands of years ago, you might think the trees themselves were alive and screaming. Maybe that's why early human settlers gave these creatures such mythic status. Some oral traditions describe them as spirit guides. Others less fondly considered them omens. Imagine waking up every morning to this jungle choir and trying to decide whether it's a blessing or a curse. You shuffle forward through the forest, stepping over tangled roots, brushing aside wet leaves that stick to your skin like gossip. The ground is soft and rich every footstep, releasing the scent of wet moss and old wood. In the trees above, silhouettes leap from branch to branch, mid-air acrobats, wrapped in thick fur. These are no ordinary animals, they're artists. Maybe not good artists, but artists nonetheless. One theory says their songs helped map territory. The louder the call, the bigger the keep-out sign. Another suggests mating displays like peacocks. but with worse pitch control. And then there's the fringe theory that their music wasn't for others at all. Maybe it was just fun. Maybe these lemurs were singing for the sheer joy of it, like a forest karaoke session no one asked for. Still, there was structure to it. Listeners today might not hear it right away because we're used to scales and harmony, but researchers studying modern eerie calls found they follow patterns almost like human musical intervals. The extinct singers likely did the same, just with their own flavor. Think less Beethoven and more alien dial-up modem. And yet, there's something touching about it. You watch a small group huddled on a branch as they warm up for the day. One leans forward, puffs out its chest, and lets out a high-pitched whine. Another joins in a deeper tone that wobbles uncertainly. Then a third jumps in, like a background vocalist trying desperately to find the key. It's chaotic, it's passionate, it's deeply weird. But you can't look away. Every so often, a pair of lemurs sings in unison, sort of. One hits a wavy high note, the other follows a beat behind, trying to harmonize. It's a disaster, and yet, oddly beautiful. Like watching a toddler dance, technically off but charming in its commitment. You lean against a tree, listening. And now that your ears are adjusting, you begin to notice details. The calls come in rhythms. There are pauses, crescendos, little trills that might be laughter or just someone getting carried away. Historians still argue whether this was a structured language musical instinct or an evolutionary accident that got way out of hand. What's certain is that the forest responded. Birds waited until the lemurs stopped before chirping their own songs. Smaller mammals kept their distance. Even the wind seemed to hold back, letting the lemurs have their moment. The sky begins to brighten first, a dull gray, then hints of orange pushing through the canopy. The lemurs quiet down their set list, complete for the morning. They yawn, stretch, and start their next routine, grooming, foraging, and leaping between branches like fluffy trapeze artists. You stay still a moment longer, letting the forest settle. Somewhere in the distance, one final note rings out, a stray singer perhaps. Or maybe someone who just missed their cue. You smile. You've survived your first encounter. Barely. You probably wouldn't last a week in this world. Too many predators, too little deodorant. But for now, you're part of something forgotten. Something noisy and fragile and wonderful. You turn and follow the group. There's more to see, much more to hear. The forest begins to stir now, and you follow the waking lemurs as they spring into motion. Their bodies move with the odd grace of something that's not quite meant for Earth's gravity. Tail heavy, limb loose, all spring and swing. You step carefully behind, brushing low-hanging vines away from your face, ducking beneath branches where dew drops cling like pearls waiting to fall. The singing has stopped for now, but the memory of it buzzes in your bones. Like you've just left a very strange concert. The group you're tailing is small, just 5 adults, and a juvenile all wrapped in thick salt and pepper fur with flashes of white near their ears. Their eyes are gold round and unnervingly intelligent. They move with purpose, climbing, jumping, then stopping abruptly to sniff the air or reach for fruit with those long, delicate fingers. You get the sense they're not just hungry. They're searching for something else, something harder to define. You learn quickly that for these extinct lemurs, let's call them Chorus eerie, a speculative cousin of the modern eerie. The forest isn't just a place to live. It's a stage, a pantry, a library, and a nightclub rolled into one. Every twist of vine tells a story. Every fallen fruit might hold a rhythm waiting to be sung. In fact, some researchers believe these lemurs could remember the specific songs of particular trees. That is when a tree bloomed, when it bore fruit, even what other animals visited it. A form of musical memory coded in pitch and tempo. Fringe, maybe. But then again, birds do it. Whales do it. Why not lemurs? As you trudge after them quietly, carefully, you notice how attuned they are to sound. One lets out a short chuff and 3 others stop dead in their tracks. Another snaps a branch and instantly everyone looks up. Communication isn't constant, but it's layered. Grunts, trills, even tail slaps against bark. A full vocal vocabulary. Historians still argue whether they had true language, but most agree that they were close. Closer than we're comfortable with probably. The juvenile gets distracted and drifts toward a nearby bush where it tries to stuff a too large flower into its mouth. It sneezes violently and falls over, much to the amusement of the others. Yes, amusement. They chitter softly, almost like laughter, and one adult nudges the baby gently back to the group. There's tenderness here, social bonds, maybe even friendship. You follow them as they move deeper into the forest's heart, where the trees grow so tightly together they block out the sky. The air is cooler here, heavier. You start to notice other sounds, now muffled bird calls, the distant croak of a tree frog, the rhythmic chewing of something large and unseen, and then drumming. Not lemurs, not you, not even humans, though the temptation is to believe so. It's the trees. Or more specifically, the massive trunks of ancient baobab trees vibrating slightly in the breeze. Some theories suggest that chorus indri use these hollow resonant trees like instruments, slapping them with their hands or tails to send signals. Think prehistoric jungle percussion. Is that true? Hard to say. No one's caught a lemur with a drumstick. But explorers in the early 1800s did report eerie booming sounds at night they attributed to ghosts of the trees. You reach one of these giants now. Its trunk is swollen like a bottle bark covered in lichen, and scratches, some of which look almost deliberate. A repeating spiral here, a faint X there. The lemurs don't linger, but you can't help pressing your palm against the bark. It's warm, faintly pulsing. You half expect it to start humming. Back to the group. They lead you across a stream, shallow and clear, its bottom glistening with smooth, rounded stones. A lemur pauses to dip its hand in, then flicks water up in a fine spray. Another joins, then another, until it turns into a quiet, flickering water game. They're playful, these singers. Not just for survival, but for joy. That's what sticks with you. In this moment, despite everything, despite predators and changing climate and eventual extinction, they find joy. You finally catch sight of their destination, a fig tree, massive and drooping with fruit. Jackpot. The lemurs scramble upward with ease, gripping the smooth bark with hands that seem made of Velcro. From above, one calls down to the juvenile, still awkwardly trying to climb. It sounds like a pep talk or a roast. You settle at the base of the tree and let your breath even out. The forest hums. Somewhere far off, a bird shrieks like it just got some really bad news. Closer, the lemurs chew and grunt and mutter to each other like a furry brunch club. And here's the mainstream fact. For the night, lemurs aren't just Madagascar's mascots. They are its oldest citizens. Tracing back nearly 60 million years, they likely rafted over from mainland Africa on floating mats of vegetation. Sounds ridiculous, right? But the theory holds. Ocean currents storm down trees, a few lucky passengers with strong stomachs, and boom, a whole new evolutionary branch. But even back then, things were changing. Forests grew, shrunk, moved. The lemurs adapted, but slowly. And those who specialized, like our musical friends here, became vulnerable. You can already feel it. The fruiting season is shorter now. Insects are behaving differently. There's a dryness in the air that doesn't belong. Change is coming. One lemur, a female, with a tuft of white across her nose, begins to sing again. It's quieter than before. A solo, a lament maybe. The others pause to listen. Even the juvenile stops chewing on its foot. It's a long, wavering note that rises and dips, then falls away into silence. You want to ask what it meant, but you know better. The wind picks up slightly and the forest responds. Leaves flutter. Vines twist. Something crashes in the distance too big to be friendly. The lemurs flinch, bunching together. Their eyes scan the treetops. You're reminded sharply that these animals don't just sing for fun. Sound is survival. Music is warning. They stay frozen for a moment longer. Then, as if on a cue you don't hear, they scatter, bounding away through the trees, melting into the foliage like smoke. You're alone now, almost. A rustle behind you. You turn slowly. Something watches from the shadows, a predator perhaps. Or maybe just another witness. Whatever it is, it doesn't sing. Not tonight. You don't run. You stay still the way you would if a dream started slipping sideways into nightmare. Whatever's behind that bush doesn't move either. The air between you is thick with silence, and then rustling softer now. Fading. Whatever it was, it leaves you behind. And with that, you're walking again. Slowly this time, mind drifting as you trace the path the singing lemurs left behind. Bent stems, a few crushed figs, a single tail hair caught on a twig. Their trail twists deeper into the forest, where the air gets even warmer, the green, darker, more ancient. You're not just following animals anymore, you're wandering into memory, into the leftover pulse of something that once was. Your thoughts drift to the first humans who would have witnessed these lemurs. Madagascar was one of the last major landmasses settled by people around 2,000 years ago. Not long ago in the grand scheme. And yet, everything changed the moment we stepped ashore. Fire hunting, farming, it all left marks. For the lemurs, it was like a new instrument had suddenly barged into their orchestra. Loud, erratic, and always offbeat. Historians still argue whether the earliest Malagasy tribes revered or hunted the singing lemurs. Some say there's evidence they were worship figures, carved in wood songs passed down in oral tradition, even taboos forbidding harm. Others argue they were eaten like any other game. After all, a lemur that sings from the treetops isn't exactly hiding. It's advertising. You imagine a village clearing at dusk. A fire crackles. Someone plays a hollow log like a drum echoing rhythms. They learned not from another human, but from the canopy above. They mimic the lemurs not mockingly but reverently, trying to speak in their tongue, trying to understand. And maybe they did. One curious scrap of fringe history comes to mind, an old tale recorded by a colonial missionary in the 1700s, describing a forest spirit that sang so beautifully it could freeze time. The villagers, terrified of aging too fast or too slow, would cover their ears whenever the music began. Pure folklore, right, or maybe not. The idea that these lemurs were so otherworldly, so uncanny in their vocalizations, that they were mistaken for ghosts or gods, it fits. You step over a fallen log and pause. It's thick, rotting in the middle hollow like a tunnel. Inside, something scurries, probably a mouse lemur or a tenrec. Nothing ghostly. Still, the silence that follows it feels ceremonial. Sacred. The lemur's trail leads you to a clearing ringed with ferns. In the center, a ring of moss-covered stones, too regular to be random, man-made, or lemur-made. No, you laugh at yourself. But still, the forest has a way of making every arrangement feel intentional. Like the whole ecosystem is a poem and you're just struggling to translate it. Above the sky finally peeks through again a lattice of gold and blue. A breeze carries faint scents, crushed fruit, rain-soaked bark, something like cinnamon. You breathe deep and rest for a moment. Your legs ache in that satisfying way that says you've earned this pause. The lemurs aren't far, you hear them again. Not singing, not yet. Just small movements, gentle rustles. You rise and follow quietly, hoping for another performance. And then it comes. Not all at once, but gradually, like morning light slipping across a floor. A single call, then another. A low tremolo note that slides upward, wobbles, then steadies. One lemur sings, then two more. Join higher tones, layered harmonic. It's a chord, not a chorus. Music that hums in your chest, like you're part of the instrument. Scientists studying eerie lemurs have noted that their songs are so precise. They share musical intervals with human music, specifically the octave and the fifth. These are fundamental to most musical traditions. Coincidence? Maybe. But try telling that to your goosebumps right now. You sit at the base of a tree, not daring to move. The lemurs sway slightly with each note. Their bodies tense and release with the rhythm. It's not performance, it's communion. Like they're syncing with the forest itself. It lasts a full 3 minutes. Then silence. Not awkward or abrupt, just complete. Like someone gently closed a door. You exhale. You hadn't realized you were holding your breath. The lemurs resume their tasks, eating, grooming, jumping like nothing mystical just happened. For them, it probably didn't. This is life. This is routine. Only we call it magic. You watch a pair of adults groom each other near the base of a fig tree. Their fingers move with a tenderness that suggests more than hygiene. Bonds are reinforced here. Trust, affection, maybe even apologies. Scientists have noted that musical species, birds, whales, even gibbons often pair their songs with social grooming. It's like music makes them more aware of each other, more attuned. And maybe that's what we lost. Somewhere between tool making and stock trading we stopped singing with the trees. But the lemurs didn't. Their music wasn't just art, it was memory, mapping migrations, marking seasons, teaching the young which plants healed and which stung. Their survival was tied to melody. And when the forest changed, when the old trees fell and the new ones didn't sing back, something essential slipped away. You rise again and follow them a little farther toward a slope, where the forest thins. The ground grows rockier, the vegetation more sparse. The lemurs grow quiet. You sense the edge of something here, an ecosystem boundary, a danger line. They hesitate. You do too. There's a strange echo in the air. Not sound, but presence. Like you've stepped into someone else's memory. Then a crack, a branch snapping. The lemurs vanish in seconds, gone in a blur of fur and fear. You're alone again. You scan the undergrowth, heart pounding. A bird explodes from a bush, shrieking. You laugh a little too loudly. Not a predator, just nerves. Still, something has shifted. You're no longer just watching the past. Now the past is watching you back. You step forward cautiously now, as though each twig underfoot might trigger some long-forgotten memory buried in the dirt. The canopy thins above you, opening the forest to more light, but also to more risk. With the lemurs gone, silence returns in that eerie ancient way. It's not just the absence of noise, it's the presence of history. pressing against your skin. You descend into a rocky ravine where vines hang like curtains and lizards scatter from sun-warmed stones. This is not lemur territory anymore. You've wandered into the land of their predators past and present. You half expect to see an enormous bird shadow pass overhead, and you wouldn't be far off, because once Madagascar was ruled by giants, the Boram Titan, whose name means big bird in Malagasy, stood over 10 feet tall and weighed more than 1,500 pounds. That's like a grumpy ostrich crossed with a linebacker. You picture one now stalking through this very ravine, enormous talons gouging the dirt head, craning high above the brush. If it made a sound, it would have been low and thunderous, nothing like the soft duets of the singing lemurs. But that's the thing, the lemurs and the giant birds shared this island. They evolved side by side, each shaping the other. The lemurs climbed higher, sang louder, became more social to stay safe. And the birds, they became more cunning, faster, more aggressive. Historians still argue whether these massive birds were actively hunting the lemurs or just opportunists. But either way, the pressure shaped behavior. It's evolution slow-motion arms race, scored with lullabies and ambushes. And now the giant birds are gone, extinct. Like so many things here, the lemurs outlasted them, but not by much. You find a stone overhang and take shelter from the midday sun. Carved faintly into the rock are markings, lines, and swirls that might have meant something or might just be the work of bored hands from another age. One resembles a lemur's handprint. Another looks almost like musical notes if you squint. Could be a coincidence. Or it could be the closest thing to a recording of their song. You imagine a child sitting here hundreds of years ago humming the tune a lemur sang that morning, trying to remember it, trying not to forget. A fringe theory pops into your head shared in the dusty corner of an anthropology conference once and immediately dismissed by the big names. The idea that early Malagasy people developed their scale of music by mimicking the lemurs, not the other way around. That their whole melodic tradition sprang not from instruments or chants, but from fur and canopy. That the forest taught us to sing before we learned to speak. Is it true? Probably not. Possibly a little. But it's beautiful. And sometimes that's enough. You sip from your water bottle, the only sound now the trickle of a small stream running through the stones. It winds like a ribbon around your feet, clear and ancient. This water has seen things. If it had a memory, it could tell you what the lemurs sounded like before the island knew humans. The stream follows a fault line, one of Madagascar's many scars from when it broke off from Africa over 160 million years ago. That rift created isolation, and isolation made evolution go wild. Lemurs, elephant birds, dwarf hippos. Nowhere else on Earth has such a strange, stunning cast of creatures. But the moment you isolate something, you also make it vulnerable. No reinforcements, no second chances. Just you and your adaptations praying they're enough. You scramble down a small ledge and find bones. Not fresh, white, clean, arranged in a kind of fan under the roots of a fallen tree. Lemur bones probably. They look delicate bird-like. The skull is intact. Tiny teeth still bared in a frozen snarl or grin. It's hard to tell with lemurs. They always look like they're plotting or surprised. The bones are likely from an Archaeoindris, a massive lemur species, now extinct, that looked something like a gorilla crossed with a slow loris. They probably didn't sing like the Indri, more of a huff and grunt type, but still part of the same forest choir. You trace the skull with one finger, not reverently, more like curiously, like touching a photo of someone you're trying to remember but can't quite place. And then you hear it. Not a song, not exactly, more like a call. A low rhythmic moan that pulses through the forest like sonar. You rise slowly. Could it be? No, not possible. You tell yourself it's the wind, but it isn't. It happens again, louder, closer. You turn toward the sound, heartbeat rising. Step after cautious step, pushing through vines and over roots until the trees part. And there perched on a low branch is something you didn't expect to see, a lone lemur. Not an indri, something different, stockier, with bold black and white markings and the most piercing, intelligent eyes you've ever seen. It watches you, doesn't flee, doesn't sing, just watches. Your throat dries up. Your hand shakes a little as you reach for your camera, then stop. Some part of you knows this moment isn't for documenting. It's for remembering. The lemur tilts its head. Then, in a single fluid leap, it disappears into the canopy. Gone. You blink. What did you just see? A rare species. A surviving member of something thought extinct. A hallucination. Brought on by dehydration and too much nostalgic speculation. Scientists argue fiercely about sightings like these. Cryptids, they call them. Animals that supposedly went extinct but are occasionally spotted in the wild. The thylacine in Tasmania. The ivory-billed woodpecker in the US. And yes, even giant lemurs in Madagascar. Most are hoaxes. Some are honest mistakes. A few, just a few, remain unexplained. You smile as you walk on, because the beauty of history isn't just in what's proven. It's in the maybes, the almosts, the songs you think you heard. And as dusk settles over the forest again, you hear another one, faint familiar, rising from the treetops. The lemurs are singing, just for you. You follow the echo of that faint song, not because you expect to find the source, but because your feet move on instinct now. The forest changes as the sun begins its lazy descent. Long shadows stretch like fingers across the undergrowth, and everything takes on a golden flickering hue, like the world is lit by candlelight. The air thickens with that late afternoon warmth, just before the jungle cools for nightfall. You push through a cluster of tall dry ferns, their edges curling like parchment, and the earth beneath your boots gives way to softer ground, a thin carpet of damp moss and decomposed leaves. The kind of place where life hides, or where it used to. Because this, you realize, is a graveyard, not a human one, not marked with stones or names, but a boneyard of species. Extinct animals that once ruled this island like kings and jesters, hunters and poets. And none more mysterious, none more haunting than the pygmy hippos. Yes, hippos. Madagascar had its own version once. 3 species, in fact, ranging from a beefy tusked bruiser that could weigh over 600 pounds to smaller swamp-dwelling cousins that probably snorted and squealed in lowland wetlands. You imagine it now, a hippo the size of a refrigerator, but twice as grumpy, lumbering through the underbrush, scattering lemurs from its path like birds from a thunderclap. Its skin slick with mud, its eyes blinking slowly, considering you. It doesn't belong in your mental picture of Madagascar, does it? This is supposed to be lemur country light, arboreal, mischievous. And yet, here, trudging through the bogs like a living tank, was this little armored bulldog of a creature. Fringe researchers love to point out that some locals still speak of them kilopilopitsofi. They're called in Malagasy. Stories passed down about water beasts seen once in a generation, always just ahead of the storyteller's eyes. And every time someone insists they spotted one, paleontologists raise an eyebrow but keep their notebooks open just in case. Historians still argue whether the dwarf hippos were wiped out by early human hunting, or if climate shifts drained the wetlands and starved them out. Probably both. That's the boring answer. but the poetic one, that they slipped into the shadows the moment they heard the first boat scraping against Madagascar's shore. Like they knew what was coming. And oh, the boats! You reach a ridge and look out, and there it is the sea. Or at least the shimmer of it between trees and sky. Blue-gray and endless curling at the edge of the world. That sea brought people here, traders, sailors, refugees, and yes, trouble. The first humans arrived on Madagascar somewhere between 2,000 and 10,000 years ago, depending on who you ask. The earliest widely accepted signs suggest seafarers from Southeast Asia, maybe Indonesia, made the trip first, followed later by people from East Africa. This strange mix birthed one of the world's most unique cultures, Malagasy, a blend of language, genetics, and tradition that echoes both across the Indian Ocean and deep into African soil. But imagine that moment. The first dugout canoe cresting the waves. The first footfall on this alien land. The smell of spice trees, the rustle of unseen creatures in the brush. The calls of lemurs echoing in the dark. You wonder what they thought when they heard the forest sing. Probably fear, or wonder, or both. And then they hunted. They would have had to. Survival first. Big lemurs were easy targets, slow-moving, trusting. They hadn't evolved to fear humans. Why would they humans didn't exist in their story yet? It's hard not to feel a twinge of guilt, but it's also hard to blame them. If you were starving and saw a gorilla-sized lemur blinking down at you from a branch, you'd probably grab a spear too. They were a gift the forest offered. Until they were gone, you wander into a grove now, where the trees grow in tight spirals, twisting like strands of DNA. The bark here is pale and flaking, almost reflective. The lemurs once danced here, yes, danced. Not just swinging through trees. Certain extinct species of lemurs like Babacotia moved in slow, deliberate gestures, almost balletic. Scholars even debate whether they had courtship rituals involving synchronized movement. And here's a delicious theory. What if the rhythm of the singing lemurs inspired early human drumming? Some Malagasy drumming patterns are staggeringly complex, interlocking polyrhythms that feel almost improvised, yet somehow tightly structured, like a forest call, like a song meant not just to be heard, but felt in your chest and bones. You squat beneath a tree and tap the dirt in a rhythm. Tap, pause, tap, tap, tap. It echoes lightly, and for a second you swear you hear an answer. Probably just your imagination, or maybe not. A lemur species called Megalodapis, commonly known as the koala lemur, once roamed these woods. It didn't sing, it didn't dance. It just ate, and ate, and ate. A living garbage disposal the size of a large dog with forward-facing eyes and a hunched, powerful frame. It probably wouldn't have been the life of the party, but it helped shape the forest by pruning trees, scattering seeds, and turning over soil with its digging paws. Nature's quiet janitor. Until someone turned it into stew. You lean against one of those DNA-twisted trees and let yourself drift. Not asleep, just paused, like you're waiting for something to speak first. It's in these moments that you realize the island isn't dead. It hums, subtly, not just with life, but with memory. The ground beneath you is composed from 1,000 generations of creatures, plants, and people. Their atoms mix and blend and rise again in vines, in roots, in curious eyes, watching you from the branches. The extinction isn't total, not really. It lingers in traces in DNA in bones, buried just beneath your heel. You sit up slowly and glance at your wrist. Your pulse is slower now, calmer. It's the forest. It's the ghosts. It's the quiet reminder that everything is temporary and everything is still connected. And just before night truly falls, just as the stars begin to peek through the leaves, you hear it again. A song. Not one you recognize. Not the mournful wail of the Indri. Something different, a deeper call, a slower tempo. Like a lullaby sung by something older than fear. You don't chase it this time, you just listen. Because maybe, just maybe, the past isn't gone. Maybe it's just singing us to sleep. The song fades, but its echo clings to your senses like fog, just enough to make you doubt whether you heard anything at all. You rise slowly from the forest floor, brushing dried leaves from your pants, your fingertips tracing the grooves of the bark beside you. The forest isn't louder now, it's quieter, expectant, as if it knows what's coming. And you do too. You're about to meet the giants. Not the hippos, not the crocodiles, not the oversized chameleons with eyes like marbles. No, these were the true titans of Madagascar. Lemurs as tall as you. Lemurs that looked you in the eye and maybe, just maybe, saw you not as predator, but as rival. Start with Archaeoindris fontoinonti, a name as clunky as the creature it belonged to. This was the largest lemur ever known. Some scientists estimate it weighed over 350 pounds and stood 5 feet tall when upright. Its skeletal structure suggests it moved slowly like a sloth, but with far more mass and strength. A lemur that couldn't leap but could knock over saplings to get at the tender leaves. You picture it now, a mountain of fur and bone, clambering through the trees like a patient ghost. If you saw one today, you'd mistake it for a bear or a person in a bear costume who's had a very weird day. And yes, you're standing in the region where their fossils were found. Central and South Madagascar, in ancient dry forests, now shrunk by centuries of agriculture and logging. But this was once their stronghold. Historians still argue whether Archaeoindris died off due to hunting habitat loss, or some ancient disease introduced by domesticated animals brought by humans. Again, it's probably all three. It usually is. But fringe theorists love to suggest a more dramatic twist, a singular event, a volcanic eruption or a series of mega-droughts, knocking the ecosystem out of balance like dominoes. One tree dies, one fruit vanishes, and a dozen species tumble behind it. You step carefully over the cracked roots of a dying baobab tree, and something flashes in your mind, a memory you never had. A vision maybe of a giant lemur curled in a nest of branches, its golden eyes reflecting starlight as it chews quietly on leaves, unaware it's one of the last of its kind. There's something sacred about these giants. The same reverence we hold for mammoths, or dodos, or great auks. They feel recent enough to haunt us, but distant enough to seem mythical. A liminal space between history and fairy tale. And speaking of liminal, meet Hadropithecus. Now there's a lemur that defies expectations. A strong jaw, flat teeth, robust build. Nicknamed the baboon lemur, it likely lived on the ground more than in trees. Think of it like Madagascar's version of a baboon. Stocky cleaver and probably a little bit mean. It might have traveled in groups, scavenging and foraging through scrublands, dry forests, and rocky outcroppings. You can almost hear them grumbling to each other in low, clicky barks, snatching up seeds and roots, wary of those strange new bipeds with spears and fire. Again, fossils place them in the South and Central Highlands. And again, the timeline overlaps uncomfortably with human arrival. What makes Hadropithecus especially intriguing is the theory that it was filling an ecological niche abandoned by monkeys. Madagascar, you see, has no native monkeys. Never did. Lemurs got here first, and in the absence of competition, they diversified to fill almost every ecological role. climbers, diggers, grazers, even insectivores. But when humans came, they brought more than weapons. They brought the competition. Rats, pigs, dogs, maybe even monkeys at some point, though those didn't stick. The balance shifted. And Hadropithecus, sturdy though it was, couldn't hold its ground. Some researchers speculate that the baboon lemur might have survived longer than we think, maybe into the last 500 years. Imagine that. A world where Shakespeare is writing plays in England, while a lemur the size of a child scampers through the underbrush of Madagascar, dodging traps and musket balls. You pause by a fallen log and lean against it, the bark cool against your palm. You think about the people who must have lived alongside these giants, not just as hunters or destroyers, but as neighbors, partners in an unspoken agreement with the forest. Or maybe not. Some oral traditions of the Malagasy do mention strange forest beings. Not lemurs by name, but creatures that could very well be garbled memories passed down through the centuries, descriptions of tall, shaggy beasts with haunting eyes and slow movements. Historians still argue whether these are mythologized lemurs or entirely different entities. But you know better than to scoff. Myths are just stories with better PR. You pass beneath a tree with scarred bark. 3 deep gouges run down its trunk, old and weathered. Not from a modern lemur, surely. Maybe not even an animal. But you imagine Paleopropithecus, the sloth lemur climbing this tree once. Another extinct cousin. Long limbs hook like hands. It dangled upside down from branches and moved with eerie slowness, like gravity didn't apply to it. You imagine it blinking at you, watching, waiting. These lemurs weren't pets. They weren't background noise. They were the architects of this forest. Their eating, nesting, and traveling patterns shaped plant growth. They scattered seeds. They fertilized soil. They were literally the gardeners of the island. And then, poof, you sit for a while just listening. The present feels thinner now, more like glass than air, as if you could reach through it and touch what came before. You hear a rustle. You turn slowly. Nothing. Probably a bird, or a breeze, or something else watching with golden eyes just outside your understanding. A joke stumbles through your mind. If a giant lemur sings in the forest and no one's around to hear it, does it leave a Spotify link? You smile to yourself. The forest doesn't laugh, but it remembers. You follow a narrow animal trail, now weaving between ferns and broken branches, your steps guided more by instinct than direction. This path wasn't made by you. Something used to walk here, something heavy. The undergrowth parts ahead of you, a small clearing. The soil is darker here, softer, almost damp. You kneel and dig a few fingers into it, rich with decay and life. Perfect ground for fossils, for secrets. A gentle breeze carries the scent of something floral, mixed with the musk of damp earth. The sun is dipping lower now, its light dimming to a warm amber. The forest glows. You imagine the giants returning, just for a moment. Archaeoindris, rising from the soil like a spirit. Hadropithecus, loping through the underbrush, curious but cautious. And above them all the song of the Indri echoing again, calling out to kin long vanished. You close your eyes, and in that quiet, in that stillness, you feel the weight of it, not just what's been lost, but what it meant. These weren't just animals, they were chapters, and someone tore the last pages out of the book. But you're still here, and the forest still whispers. You stretch your legs as you rise, the ground cool and loamy beneath your hands. Every root, every twist of branch feels alive with ghosts. And as you weave your way back to the narrow trail, your ears tune in faint creaks rustles the sigh of wind, pushing through green canopies like breath through a flute. It almost sounds musical. You smirk. Maybe it's just your overactive imagination. Or maybe, just maybe, you're beginning to understand the real reason those lemurs once sang. Not just for fun, not just for love, but for territory. Yes, we're about to dive into the original chorus wars of Madagascar. The great musical standoffs that echoed across the treetops and made the modern boy band feuds look like gentle ukulele duets. Lemurs, particularly the eerie, the singing lemur, are known for their dramatic, harmonious calls. These aren't casual chirps or grunts. They're long, mournful howls, filled with rising and falling notes like a theremin trying to find Wi-Fi. Each song announces a family's presence. This is our patch of forest, it declares. Trespass at your own risk, and also enjoy this very emotional power ballad. Historians still argue whether extinct lemurs like Paleopropithecus or Megalodapis, the so-called koala lemur, joined in this acoustic arms race. We don't have direct evidence, of course. Vocal cords don't fossilize, but skull shapes, inner ear bones, and the size of nasal cavities suggest that some of them might have had surprisingly complex vocal abilities. Imagine it, the morning mist, lifting over a valley, and from the fog comes a layered melody, low grumbles, rising whoops, and deep choral pulses from creatures that look like walking teddy bears. Not one song, but 5. A forest-wide opera, written in instinct and leaves. You pause at a particularly ancient tree. Its roots sprawled like sleeping limbs across the forest floor. There's a hollow in the bark just big enough for something small to have once curled inside. A lemur nest. Maybe one of the last. Territory for these lemurs wasn't just about space. It was about food mates, legacy. The forest isn't one endless buffet. Some areas have richer soil, better fruiting trees, more cover from predators. A prime territory means survival. A bad one means extinction. So the songs weren't casual. They were vital. And they weren't always peaceful. Picture 2 lemur families perched in neighboring trees. One group starts singing, a high-pitched keening cry with long vibrato. The second group hears it and responds slightly louder, slightly faster. You'd think it was a duet. It's not. It's a vocal flex. Biologists call it song matching, a kind of back-and-forth call where each group tries to match or outdo the other in rhythm, duration, and pitch. It's the primate version of a dance battle minus the windmills and break spins. And yes, fights sometimes followed. Not always physical. But if one group pushed too close, things could get ugly. Lemurs, despite their fussy appearance, have sharp teeth and strong grips. When diplomacy fails, it's claws and shrieks. You sit down again, this time on a mossy stone. The air here smells of citrus and bark. You imagine a time when the forest sounded like a choir, each tree sheltering a voice, each call echoing like a heartbeat. Then came silence. It's strange how extinction doesn't happen with a bang. Usually, it's a slow fading. One year a call is missing. The next, no one replies. Soon, a forest filled with noise becomes one where the loudest thing is your own breath. But let's get back to the singers. Modern eerie still perform these territorial ballads, but they're endangered. And their range is shrinking. Once their songs carried for miles. Now they barely make it past the nearest logging road. And here's the weird bit, the real fringe detail that makes your eyebrows arch. There are recordings of eerie duets where the male and female voices harmonize in what researchers describe as structured rhythmic intervals, which sounds technical until you realize it means they're literally singing in time like trained vocalists. One study even found that the timing between notes followed something called categorical rhythm. In simpler terms, they didn't just screech, they followed a beat. Like a metronome, like music. So yeah, singing lemurs weren't just loud, they were musicians. Now here's where it gets juicy. Some researchers, particularly those from cognitive science, believe that the Indris singing could offer clues about the evolution of human music. Why do we love rhythm? Why does a beat make us move? Maybe the roots go deeper than we think. Maybe we inherited it from creatures like these distant cousins who sang to claim space, find love, and stay alive. You glance at your feet, noticing a line of tiny mushrooms curling along a root. They almost look like notes on a page, a forest sheet music half erased. And if that's the case, if music was part of survival, then maybe the extinction of these creatures didn't just rob us of biodiversity. Maybe it took an entire genre of music with it. The lost soundscape of Madagascar. You walk again, ducking beneath a low branch. A fruit falls nearby with a soft thud. You half expect a lemur to scurry out and snatch it. But there's only silence. The fruit rolls, settles, and waits. In one corner of your mind, you imagine the possibility. What if we could recreate the songs, use modern bioacoustic models, simulate the voices based on skull shapes, and vocal tract reconstructions? A Jurassic Park for sound. It wouldn't be perfect, of course. But maybe, just maybe, we could hear what the forest once heard. And maybe that's enough. Or maybe not. There's a quiet debate in the field between those who want to reconstruct and those who prefer to let silence stand. Some argue that approximating extinct songs cheapens the mystery. Others say it's a way to honor them, to bring their voices back into a world that forgot them. Historians still argue whether the forest benefits more from remembrance or reverence. You look up, the sky is shifting. Dusk bleeding into deeper blue. Stars pricking through the canopy like whispers. You realize you haven't heard a single modern animal in a while. Not a bird, not a gecko. Just your footsteps and breath. Maybe that's the point. These songs weren't written down. They weren't recorded. They were passed through generations, each note teaching the next how to survive. Until the last voice fell silent. And there was no one left to learn the tune. You sit again, knees hugged to your chest. In the far distance, you think you hear something, a high wavering sound just on the edge of perception. It's probably a trick of wind, or imagination, or memory. But maybe it's something older. One last echo, one last refrain. You smile, eyes closed, and hum softly to yourself. It's not the right melody. Not even close. But the forest doesn't mind. It listens anyway. You rise and continue your trek, feeling the subtle shift in the forest's mood. The dense canopy above filters the sunlight into thin golden ribbons, and the air hums with tiny insects and the distant calls of unseen birds. Somewhere in the underbrush, leaves crunch softly underfoot, reminding you that life persists even after great loss. Now let's talk about the giant sloths of Madagascar. Archaeoindris, a creature so massive that it dwarfed even today's largest ground sloths in the Americas, standing as tall as a modern gorilla and weighing over 400 kilograms, this beast was like a gentle giant, lumbering through the dense Malagasy forests. You can almost picture it, right? A shaggy colossus, slowly munching on leaves, swaying with an almost hypnotic calm. But here's the quirky part. Archaeoindris likely moved more like a modern gorilla than the slow, clumsy sloths you might be picturing. Instead of hanging upside down from trees, it probably spent most of its time on the ground, shuffling on all fours, but capable of standing upright for brief stretches. Imagine it trying to blend in, like a giant, furry security guard who's a bit slow on the uptake. There's still a big scholarly debate over exactly how Archaeoindris fit into the ecosystem. Some researchers suggest it was a strict folivore, munching on the tender leaves of the forest canopy. Others argue that it may have browsed lower vegetation like shrubs and young trees, making it a kind of slow-motion lawnmower. Historians and paleontologists still argue whether its massive size was a defense against predators or just a side effect of island gigantism, where isolated island species evolve into unusually large or small forms. Speaking of predators, Madagascar's ancient landscape was home to a slew of unique carnivores, including the now extinct megalodon of the lemur world, the gigantic bone-crushing Cryptoprocta spelaea, a giant fossa cousin. While the giant sloth was slow and peaceful, the forests weren't exactly a safe place. You wouldn't want to get caught between one of these predators and a giant herbivore's massive claw. But what really makes Archaeoindris fascinating is how it disappeared. Unlike many animals that vanish after the last ice age, this giant sloth likely coexisted with early human settlers. The timing suggests that humans' arrival on Madagascar around 2,000 years ago coincided with a rapid extinction event, slash and burn, agriculture habitat destruction, and hunting pressure combined to wipe out these gentle giants. You might be surprised to learn that despite their size, Archaeoindris bones are incredibly fragile, thin-walled, and light, suggesting a surprisingly delicate bone structure for such a bulky creature. It's like it was built big, but with a bit of architectural over-optimism. This fragility has made fossil recovery challenging, meaning we only have patchy glimpses of their true appearance. Here's a fringe tidbit, some folklore from Malagasy culture hints at giant forest creatures with long arms and slow movements, possibly faint echoes of memories passed down from ancient encounters with creatures like Archaeoindris. Whether these tales are exaggerations, misinterpretations, or true cultural memories, no one can say for sure. You imagine walking through that lost world, the giant sloth, shuffling past you unfazed by your presence, its deep breath mingling with the rustling leaves. The forest is a living museum, but one that's slowly closing its doors. And as you continue, you can't help but think about how different the island's ecosystem would be without these giants. Their feeding habits probably shape the forest's structure, opening pathways and dispersing seeds in ways modern animals cannot replicate. Their absence created ecological voids that changed the entire island's evolutionary trajectory. You step over a fallen branch and look up at a small chameleon clinging to a leaf. The fragile balance of life continues, even if the giants are gone. Historians still argue whether the giant sloth's extinction was a slow decline or a rapid collapse triggered by human activity, or perhaps a mix of both. Either way, it's a haunting reminder of how delicate the dance of survival can be, especially on an island lost in time. You keep moving through the thick undergrowth, noticing the earthy scent of damp soil, mixing with the sharp tang of decaying leaves. Every step feels heavier now, like the weight of the past is settling in around you, pressing gently but persistently. You find yourself wondering what other giants once roamed this place. So unlike the nimble, darting lemurs you know, Enter the elephant birds, the true titans of Madagascar's lost menagerie. These birds, known scientifically as Epiornis and Borambe, were enormous, flightless, and absolutely mind-blowing in size. Imagine a bird so large it stood nearly 3 meters tall and weighed up to 500 kilograms, roughly the size of a small car. And no, they didn't just walk around casually. They probably strutted like feathery skyscrapers. Elephant birds were the largest birds known to have ever existed, and their eggs, forget jumbo. These eggs could be over a foot long and hold the equivalent of about 150 chicken eggs inside. If you try to make an omelette from one of those, it might feed an entire village. You can almost hear the ancient forests echoing with their booming footsteps, shaking the ground like an elephant's heartbeat. Yet these birds weren't just loud. They played a critical role in their ecosystems, dispersing seeds of the giant trees and shaping the forests as they foraged. Here's a quirky tidbit. Despite their size, elephant birds probably had a surprisingly slow metabolism and might have been somewhat lethargic. Scientists speculate they might have been more like giant tortoises than fast-moving ostriches, slowly plodding through the forests and grasslands. Historians and paleontologists still argue about the exact causes of their extinction. Some suggest that early humans hunted them to oblivion, while others point to habitat destruction and the introduction of invasive species such as rats and dogs, which preyed on their eggs and young chicks. A mix of factors likely combined to end the reign of these feathered giants. Interestingly, there are ancient Malagasy legends about giant birds called Borompatra, which some scholars believe might be cultural memories of the elephant bird's existence. These stories describe enormous birds that could carry away humans, a terrifying thought, but maybe just an echo of the truth distorted through centuries. You picture the eerie silence now that these massive birds have vanished, replaced by the chirps and calls of their much smaller descendants. Their shells and bones are all that remain, some scattered along riverbeds, others carefully preserved in museums. But the elephant bird's legacy isn't just fossilized. In recent years, DNA analysis has revealed fascinating connections between these giant birds and modern species, like kiwis and cassowaries, showing how Madagascar's isolated evolution produced creatures both strange and magnificent. You feel a chill and look around, half expecting to see a shadow the size of a small house moving between the trees. But there's nothing but the gentle rustling of leaves and the occasional flutter of small birds. It's a strange feeling, the realization that what you're walking through is an empty stage where ancient giants once performed. You pause to breathe, sensing the immense scale of time pressing down. Elephant birds remind us that evolution can surprise us with extremes, and that sometimes the biggest players can vanish faster than you'd expect. And that leads you to a darker, stranger corner of the story. You remember the curious discovery that some elephant bird bones show signs of butchery, cut marks from stone tools. Humans didn't just passively coexist with these giants, they hunted them. It's hard to imagine. You'd think that a bird the size of a fridge would be pretty tough to bring down. But early humans were clever and resourceful. Maybe they hunted in groups or used traps. Maybe they took eggs and chicks instead of adults. Historians still argue whether human predation was the death blow or simply the last straw in a bird already struggling from environmental changes. You pocket a small stone, smooth and cold from the stream bed. It feels insignificant compared to the enormity of the vanished birds, but it's a silent testament to a time when humans and giants crossed paths a fleeting moment in an ancient forest, now lost to time. You step forward feeling the forest's pulse, slow around you, the ghosts of those feathered titans lingering in the dappled light. You keep moving deeper into the ancient Malagasy wilderness, the canopy thickening above, until sunlight trickles down like liquid gold through the leaves. The air hums with live crickets, chirp, cicadas drone, and somewhere distant the haunting call of a nocturnal bird echoes. But beneath the lively hum, you can almost hear the quiet whisper of a lost world, the voices of creatures that no longer walk these forests. Now it's time to meet the giant lemurs, those oversized relatives of the lemurs you've probably seen, bouncing around zoos or animated movies. Unlike the tiny, agile lemurs you might be picturing, these giants were like the gentle giants of the primate world, big, slow, and kind of awkward in all the right ways. One of the best-known species was Archaeondris, which we've touched on before, but there were others just as intriguing. For example, Paleopropithecus, often called the sloth lemur, sported long limbs and hooked fingers, perfect for hanging in trees. You imagine it moving through the canopy in slow motion, like a primate yoga master hanging upside down and swinging with deliberate grace. But here's where things get a bit quirky. The giant lemurs weren't just oversized versions of their modern cousins. They filled ecological roles that no other animals could. Some scientists believe they were crucial seed dispersers, shaping Madagascar's unique forests. It's like they were the gardeners of the island, pruning and planting without a single green thumb. Historians still argue whether their slow movement was an adaptation to avoid predators or simply a side effect of their large size on an island with few big threats. Until humans arrived, that is. Speaking of threats, the arrival of humans around 2,000 years ago brought new challenges. Hunting habitat destruction and competition from introduced species likely pushed many of these gentle giants into extinction. It's hard to imagine how a creature that weighed as much as a small deer could survive in a rapidly changing world where tools and fire were becoming commonplace. But here's a fun and slightly odd fact. Some giant lemurs had diets that included not just leaves and fruit, but also tough fibrous plants and even hard seeds. Their teeth and jaws were specialized for this, showing a remarkable adaptation to their environment. You might be surprised to learn that fossils of giant lemurs often show signs of disease and injury, broken bones, that healed poorly, infections that suggest a harsh life, even before humans entered the picture. It's a reminder that nature wasn't all gentle giants and calm forests. Life was often brutal even for the slow-moving. You pause by a fallen tree, imagining a giant lemur, balancing on its long arms, nibbling on a fruit, oblivious to the slow approach of humans hunting for food. Scholars still debate exactly how quickly these animals disappeared. Was it a sudden collapse or a drawn-out decline? The evidence is fragmented like a puzzle missing key pieces. And here's something unexpected. Some researchers have suggested that the behaviors of modern lemurs might still carry echoes of their giant ancestors. Certain movement patterns or dietary preferences could be remnants of a time when lemurs ruled Madagascar's forests on a much larger scale. You step lightly on moss-covered roots, feeling the softness beneath your feet. The silence feels heavier now, like the forest is holding its breath. Maybe the giant lemur story is a cautionary tale, a reminder that even the most majestic and ancient creatures can vanish in the blink of an eye, leaving only whispers behind. As you continue walking, the thought lingers. What else might we learn if only we could hear the songs of those lost giants? The forest breathes around you, dense, with the scent of damp bark and crushed leaves. The air is still safe for the occasional drop of moisture falling from the canopy above, landing softly on your shoulder. You brush it off and continue along the worn animal path, which seems less like a trail and more like a memory of one. The deeper you go, the more the forest feels like a time machine, one that isn't quite sure what year it is anymore. You've already met Madagascar's gentle giants, the sloth, lemurs, the elephant birds. But now the forest begins whispering a different kind of story. One not of size or majesty, but of loss, that still lingers in the songs of today's lemurs. This is where the mystery deepens the silence left behind by Madagascar's extinct singing lemurs. There's a strange thing about eerie lemurs, the largest of the living lemur species. They sing not just random whoops or screeches, but actual songs complete with rhythm, repetition, and harmony. These haunting calls echo through the forest, like nature's own opera, carrying for miles, sometimes in eerie duets, between distant family groups. So here's the kicker. What if there used to be even more of these singing lemurs once that are now extinct, ones whose voices have vanished forever? Scientists studying the eerie and their musical relatives have uncovered something fascinating evidence that ancestral lemurs may have shared this complex musical behavior. Vocal learning, coordinated choruses, even rudimentary sense of tempo. And yet the fossil record is quiet on this. Bones don't sing after all, but modern lemurs may still carry the echoes. A quirky fact, the rhythm used by eerie lemurs, called what-one rhythm, is the same beat structure you find in most human music. Yes, your favorite playlist and a lemur's morning duet might actually share a groove. Who knew your iPod and the treetop critter could be musical soulmates? Historians still argue whether these musical behaviors evolved as a form of social bonding, territorial defense, or mate attraction, or all three. The debate is lively and oddly poetic. You can imagine a heated academic argument breaking out to the soundtrack of lemur harmonies. But here's the sad twist. Many of Madagascar's lemur species, particularly the ones that showed signs of advanced communication or singing, are now extinct. Some disappeared just a few hundred years ago, practically yesterday in evolutionary terms. Species like Megalodapis and Hadropithecus may have had vocal capabilities that rivaled or even exceeded the eerie's, but we'll never truly know. You imagine walking these forests centuries ago, hearing a full chorus of lemur voices at dawn. Now only fragments remain, solitary singers in an orchestra that once spanned the canopy. You stop and sit on a mossy rock, letting your thoughts drift like the rising mist around you. It's comforting in a strange way to think of these vanished voices living on in today's lemurs, like ghost songs passed down through generations. But the quiet ache of extinction hangs in the air too. Many modern lemurs are critically endangered. Habitat loss, climate shifts, and hunting continue to chip away at the chorus. Every silenced voice narrows the forest songbook. There's a Malagasy legend passed from village to village that speaks of tree spirits who once sang the world into being. Some say the eerie's call is the last echo of those spirits, that when the eerie falls silent, the island will forget how to sing. Whether that's folklore or a poetic truth wrapped in myth, it sticks with you. Like a tune you can't get out of your head. You rise, brushing your hands on your pants, the fabric damp with dew and dirt. The canopy shivers in a sudden breeze, and for a second you think you hear something, a harmonic note, drifting on the wind. Maybe it's just a bird call. Or maybe, just maybe, it's one of the last singers still holding the line. You take one last look around the forest and move forward, because tonight the singing lemurs still have more secrets to share. The trail narrows now, curling like a vine between towering trunks. The ground is softer here, carpeted in centuries of fallen leaves and broken time. As you walk, you feel a change in the air. It's heavier, as if history itself is hanging from the trees. Maybe it's just your imagination, or maybe this is where the songs truly went silent. Tonight, you're heading into the mystery of how the singing lemurs, those crooners of the canopy, disappeared. Not with a bang, but a gradual fade, like someone turning down the volume on an ancient radio. By now, you've probably guessed that Madagascar's story is not just a tale of magical evolution. It's also a tragedy, one that unfolded over centuries. The extinction of these vocal primates wasn't caused by a single catastrophic event. It was a slow, unraveling one, made up of many tiny threads, fire hunger logging, and ironically, silence. Let's start with a mainstream historical fact. Humans arrived in Madagascar somewhere between 2000 and 2500 years ago. They came by canoe across treacherous seas, likely from Borneo, East Africa, or both. They brought fire rice and zebu cattle, and within a few centuries, the landscape began to shift. Fire was used to clear forests. The native flora evolved to thrive in a fire-free world had no defense. Open grasslands spread like spilled paint. Lemurs, especially the slow, tree-dwelling giants with complex vocalizations, began losing their homes. And here's where it gets weird. Some researchers believe these lemurs may have been too friendly. Unused to predators, they may have walked right up to early humans, or at least not run away fast enough. If that sounds absurd, remember the dodo did exactly that, waddling up to hungry sailors like it was greeting old friends. Historians still argue whether the largest lemur species were hunted aggressively or if their extinction was mostly environmental. Bone fragments show cut marks, clear signs of butchery, but they're sparse. Was the hunting widespread or isolated? Was it sustenance or ceremony? Here's a fringe tidbit. In some Malagasy oral traditions, there are stories of forest spirits that once spoke, like people with deep, echoing voices. Some anthropologists believe these stories may reference the now extinct vocal lemurs. If true, it suggests those haunting songs once echoed in human memory, not just in biology. You duck beneath a low-hanging branch, stepping over twisted roots. Up ahead, a massive tree stands hollowed and blackened from an old burn. You press your palm to the bark, cold and still. This tree could be centuries old. It may have once cradled the nest of a singing lemur. The silence here is total. And that's the thing, the extinction of vocal species doesn't just rob a forest of its biodiversity. It robs it of its soundscape. The forest becomes quieter. Birds adjust their calls. Insects buzz in different rhythms. Even predators change how they hunt. It's as if nature itself rewrites the music once the musicians are gone. You think of modern indie lemurs singing to one another through the fog. Once they may have sung in harmony with larger cousins, different species performing forest duets in the mornings, a kind of ecological jazz. Now their melodies go unanswered. Some researchers have tried to reconstruct the sounds of extinct lemurs based on modern relatives and anatomical clues. It's part science, part art, and part guesswork. Like building a symphony from a broken flute. In one study, a team analyzed vocal tract bones from fossil lemurs and compared them to existing species. The results suggested deep resonant calls, lower than anything alive today. not unlike the baritone boom of howler monkeys in South America. That makes you wonder, what did these forests sound like 1,000 years ago? More importantly, what do we lose when a sound disappears? You pause, letting that question sit. There's something unspoken about extinction that rarely makes the textbooks the grief of silence. It's not just the loss of a body, but of a voice, a culture, a connection. Lemurs are not just animals. They're storytellers of ancestry, evolution, and ecosystems. Every time one vanishes, a story ends mid-sentence. As you walk again, your footsteps are hushed, swallowed by the undergrowth. Somewhere behind you, a bird lets out a sharp call. But you're still listening for something more, the whisper of a lost chorus. A harmony that may never be heard again. And yet, in the branches above, a lone eerie calls out. One voice left, still singing, still holding the rhythm. The path slopes gently downward the forest, growing denser with each step, like nature pulling a blanket tighter over itself. Moss softens the tree's vines, stretched lazily from limb to limb, and the occasional glimmer of dew catches moonlight in the leaves. You step quietly now, not just out of reverence, but because you feel like you're trespassing through a half-remembered lullaby. Tonight, you're walking into a theory that tickles the edges of both science and sorrow. Could some of the extinct singing lemurs have been even more musical than the ones still alive? Could Madagascar have once pulsed with complex melodic communication, richer than anything we hear now? Let's take a detour through the eerie again, our best modern window into the voices of the past. Their songs aren't just noises. They have pitch, rhythm, and even call and response patterns. Whole families sing together like little jazz ensembles. And these performances aren't random. They're structured like verses and choruses. Now take that and turn the dial up. Enter Paleopropithecus, a genus of extinct sloth lemur that lived until just a few hundred years ago. Picture this: a lemur the size of a large dog moving in slow motion through the trees, perhaps pausing at dawn to release a resonant guttural bellow across the canopy. Its skeletal structure, especially the inner ear and laryngeal regions, suggests it was built for sound. Historians still argue whether Paleopropithecus vocalized like modern eerie or had an entirely unique system of calls. Some propose it might have used infrasonic tones, deep frequencies that travel farther like elephants do. That would make it not just musical, but haunting. Imagine a rainforest trembling with vibrations you can feel more than hear. Here's a quirky fact: researchers discovered the bones of one Paleopropithecus buried alongside artifacts from early human settlements. Some even show signs of red ochre, a pigment used in rituals. Was the animal revered, feared, eaten, or mourned? One paper, yes peer-reviewed, suggested early Malagasy might have listened to these lemurs sing, then mimicked them in chant and ceremony, a kind of interspecies musical exchange. That idea might sound wild, but think of it this way. Humans have a long tradition of incorporating animal calls into music. From bird-inspired flutes in the Andes to throat singing in Mongolia that imitates wolves and wind, we've always had one ear turned toward the natural world. So why not lemurs? It makes you wonder if our ancestors could hear these songs and replicate them. Maybe pieces of those lemur calls still echo in Malagasy folk music, in lullabies, in rhythms beaten into drums. But here's the heartbreaker: no recording exists. No notation. Just a few bones, a few guesses, and a silence thick with possibilities. You dug beneath a thick curtain of vines, emerging into a clearing where moonlight spills across a fallen log. It's a perfect place to rest, and you sit, letting the forest breathe around you. Night insects chirp their steady rhythm. Percussionists who never left the stage. Some scientists believe the rise of agriculture sealed the fate of the singing lemurs. Forests were cut, not out of malice but necessity. Rice paddies don't coexist with towering hardwoods. As land was cleared, the lemurs' territories shattered like broken glass. Those that relied on vocalizations to communicate across wide ranges like the big singers were hit hardest. One team of primatologists even theorized that vocal complexity may have made some species less adaptable. Being musical meant needing space acoustics and social groups. Once those vanished, so did the music. And here's the philosophical twist. Does a song still exist if no one remembers how it goes? The forest seems to whisper back, maybe, because the indri still sings. The black and white ruffed lemur still performs its chaotic jazz solos. And in isolated corners of the island, there may still be subspecies we haven't even discovered, still humming a tune the world thought lost. It's both comforting and heartbreaking. You rise, brushing dirt from your hands, listening for one last note. You hear a distant whoop, a fragment of a melody rising like steam through the leaves. It might be an indri, or it might be your imagination filling in the missing parts. But that's okay. Sometimes remembering the silence is how we remember the song. You follow the trail as it weaves through tangled bamboo and under thick fern canopies, ducking branches that creak like old voices. There's a coolness here now, and the hush of night deepens. You feel almost suspended in time, as if the forest is waiting for something to happen, or maybe for someone to return. Tonight, we're digging into something thornier: what went wrong with conservation. Because here's the gut punch: by the time scientists truly tuned in to Madagascar's singing, lemurs, many had already gone quiet. Let's hit the big historical marker first. Modern conservation in Madagascar didn't kick off in earnest until the 1960s. And even then, it was slow going. Political instability, poverty, and isolation meant that protecting species was often low on the national to-do list. Understandably so, when people are hungry, saving a treetop tenor isn't always priority number one. And here's where things get frustrating. Some of the extinct lemurs we've been talking about, they may have survived into the 16th or 17th century. That's well after European ships first sailed by, after written records began spreading around the world. And yet, no sketches, no journals, no preserved specimens, just bones and secondhand whispers. The music faded before we even realized we should have been listening. Now, here's a quirky little conservation tidbit. In the 1980s, a group of researchers placed loudspeakers in the forest and played indri songs to map responses from nearby troops. Not only did the indri respond, they harmonized. They literally sang back. That experiment showed just how critical sound is to these animals' behavior. But it also raised a chilling possibility: if a species that's still alive can barely find each other through habitat fragmentation, what chance did the bigger, rarer ones ever have? Historians still argue whether earlier conservation efforts might have made a difference. Some say yes, a few sanctuaries, a handful of corridors, and maybe the sloth lemurs could have held on. Others believe it was already too late. The habitat was broken, the forests shattered like a drop mirror. The big singers needed room to roam and resonate. Once the notes couldn't travel, the songs began to die. You reach a ridge and look down into a dark basin where fog rolls low and thick. This is where one of the last known fossils of Archaeoindris was found. That's the granddaddy of all lemurs. Think gorilla-sized, slow-moving, and possibly capable of vocalizations that made the forest shiver. Just imagine that for a second. A lemur the size of a refrigerator humming to its kin. Through the treetops, its voice, reverberating through the valleys. Gone, all of it. And not because of a comet or an ice age, but because of machetes, cattle, and matches. There's a haunting term conservationists sometimes use, extinction debt. It refers to species that aren't extinct yet, but are basically walking ghosts. Their populations are so small, their genetic diversity so low, that extinction is just a matter of time. Some worry that even the eerie is already in that category. The songs we hear now, they may be the final verses. Still, there's a strange hope clinging to the edges. You've probably heard of the concept of a Lazarus species, an animal thought extinct, only to be found alive and well decades later. The coelacanth, a prehistoric fish, was dragged out of the ocean like a soggy miracle in 1938. In Madagascar, new species of lemurs are still being discovered. So could one of the singers have slipped through the cracks? Could some ancient melody still echo, hidden in a forgotten corner of the forest? Some believe yes. A handful of unverified sightings, strange calls heard by locals, and bits of fur found deep in the Andohahela rainforest have kept a flicker of hope alive. You crouch beneath a low tree limb, and suddenly a rustle of movement catches your ear. You freeze. Then a distant call, a whooping melodic rise. Not quite an eerie, not quite a bird. Your skin prickles. It could be anything, or it could be nothing. But that's the thing about hope, it hums quietly even when everything else has gone silent. As you move again, the fog swirls around your legs like ghostly applause. You're not just walking through a forest, you're walking through a score, a movement in a song that has mostly faded. But not entirely, not yet. Not as long as someone is still listening. The path becomes softer now, muddier underfoot, padded by a bed of fallen leaves. Each step sings, just slightly as if the forest wants you to slow down. There's a weight in the air too. Not oppressive exactly, but something close to reverence. Like you're approaching a cathedral, made not of stone, but branches and memories. And here's the question echoing through this sacred hush. Did humans and singing lemurs ever truly coexist meaningfully? Not just passing glances or brief encounters, but full-blown cultural overlap. Let's set the scene with a real documented historical fact. When the first Austronesian-speaking peoples arrived in Madagascar, around 1,500 to 2,000 years ago, they brought rice cultivation, zebu cattle, and new tools. But they didn't arrive to an empty island. There were already forest creatures, some towering over them, some singing from the canopy. Now here's the quirky bit. In Malagasy folklore, there are stories of ghostly forest beings, large, slow, covered in fur, often with mournful voices. Some are tricksters, some are warnings, others are protectors. While modern anthropologists chalk many of these up to metaphor or myth, a growing minority whisper, what if some of them weren't? You tread carefully past a twisted banyan tree, its roots like stone serpents curling across the ground. And you'd think maybe those legends weren't just born from imagination. Maybe they were echoes. Echoes of singing lemurs once so present, so woven into the lives of early Malagasy people, that when the lemurs disappeared, only their ghost stories remained. Historians still argue whether human memory can retain accurate biological information across generations purely through oral storytelling. But there are precedents. Aboriginal Australians told stories of long-extinct megafauna that matched fossil discoveries 20,000 years later. So why couldn't a tale of a weeping forest dweller Be the last surviving birds of a species that used to sing. There's even a specific creature from Malagasy lore that stands out, the Kalanoro, often described as a hairy forest-dwelling humanoid with a peculiar cry. Some versions say it mimics people. Others say it sings at night. While modern skeptics link it to superstition, a few fringe researchers have quietly suggested it may be a warped cultural memory of Paleopropithecus, or even a still unknown primate. As you cross a shallow stream, the water burbling softly beneath your feet, you imagine it again, early humans gathered near a fire listening to calls echo through the forest. They wouldn't have had binoculars or field guides, just ears, stories, and wonder. What did they make of it? Perhaps they tried to replicate the sounds, turning lemur songs into chants. Perhaps a child mimicked a call once, and that mimicry became a ritual. Over time, maybe the lemur's absence was felt so deeply, the call continued without the singer. Isn't that what a ritual is, after all, a form, repeated after its purpose is gone? And now, as the modern world hums louder airplanes above trucks on distant roads, the songs are almost impossible to hear. But the myths remain. You can still ask elders in remote Malagasy villages about the strange forest voices, and they'll pause eyes, flickering toward the trees. They might laugh it off, or they might warn you, don't follow the singing. You smile because that's exactly what you're doing. There's a warm breeze, now, rustling the canopy, and for a brief moment, you could swear it sounds like a sigh. Like the forest is remembering something too. Some anthropologists believe that early Malagasy cosmology, its concepts of sacred trees, ancestral spirits in the canopy, and taboos around hunting may have been shaped by encounters with these extinct species. That the forest itself became sacred because of the voices it once held. And that makes sense, doesn't it? When something sings to you, you want to protect it. It's almost funny in a bittersweet way. We build churches around choirs. We hush stadiums for national anthems. And yet somehow we bulldoze the choirs of Madagascar before we even thought to hit record. You stop and look up. The stars are piercing tonight, punching through the canopy in bright clusters. A little frog croaks nearby, setting the tempo for the forest's midnight lullaby. You lean against a tree and close your eyes, not to sleep, but to listen. Because deep down, we're not just looking for animals, we're looking for connection, for echoes, for something to remind us we're not the only ones with stories and sorrow. And maybe, just maybe, those old lemur songs are still echoing through us in how we grieve, how we remember, and how we sometimes sing without knowing why. So the next time you hum a tune, for no reason, just maybe it isn't yours. Your hand brushes a patch of moss on the tree's bark, soft, damp, and strangely cool. The forest doesn't sleep, not really. It simmers at night. Insects whisper in their wings. Leaves flutter like breaths. Somewhere, something dropped with a muffled thud. And you pause just for a heartbeat, wondering if one of the ghosts of this story has decided to say hello. This section's going to drift us into stranger territory. Not just the extinction of the singing lemurs, but the surreal scientific rabbit holes their story has inspired. Because when something magnificent disappears, it doesn't just vanish. It leaves gaps. And humans, we hate gaps. So we fill them with guesses, myths, and some of the weirdest theories you'll ever hear. Let's begin with one actual scientific oddity: phylogenetic bracketing. It's the idea that by studying living relatives of extinct species, you can make educated guesses about how those extinct ones might have behaved. It's how we figured dinosaurs probably had feathers. And it's how some researchers piece together the possible vocal range of Polyopropithecus, a lemur that hasn't sung a note in thousands of years. See, modern Indrists use something called a laryngeal air sac, basically a built-in acoustic chamber in their throats. It helps them hit those long resonant notes. Fossil evidence suggests that some extinct lemurs had even more complex versions of this anatomy. In other words, their songs might have made the Indri sound like a kazoo in comparison. Here's your quirky tidbit. One speculative model built in the late 1990s proposed that the extinct Babacotia could have sung in infrasonic tones. That's the same low-frequency stuff elephants and whales use. Lemurs, whispering through trees in sounds too deep for the human ear to register. That's not science fiction. That's science, with just a dash of reverb. Now, historians still argue whether any of these reconstructions are truly valid. The vocal tract doesn't fossilize after all, not completely. You get clues, not certainty. And a few researchers think we've let our imaginations run a little wild. That maybe we want these lemurs to be opera singers so badly, we're fitting them with metaphorical tuxedos and top hats. But who could blame us? When you lose something beautiful, your brain starts remixing it. You amplify the melody, fill in the forgotten verses, make the silence less brutal. There's even a growing subfield acoustic paleobiology, where scientists try to digitally reconstruct the sounds of extinct species. They run bone measurements through software model the airflow and hit play. Most of it's still theoretical, but in a few labs, if you're lucky, you can hear a hauntingly artificial voice of something that hasn't lived since before pyramids were a blueprint. And it's not just about the sounds. The lemur's extinction has nudged researchers into fresh theories about primate evolution. Some now argue that Madagascar was once home to the most behaviorally complex non-human primates on Earth, not just in terms of tool use or grooming hierarchies, but in how they communicated, coordinated, and maybe even performed. Think about that for a second. What if we lost not just a species, but a culture? There's a line of thought whispered more than published that suggests the lemur songs had seasonal variations, that they changed based on weather, food abundance, or even social rituals. It's speculative, sure, but among the Indri we have seen mating pairs sync their duets during courtship. That's not just instinct, that's rhythm, that's jazz. You step over a fallen log, its bark peeling like curled paper, and feel a pang of what might be nostalgia for something you never heard. Madagascar today is a place where science meets heartbreak at every turn. Every time researchers uncover a fossil site, it's a coin flip excitement for discovery or sorrow at how recent the death might have been. And yet the questions keep coming. What other senses did these lemurs rely on? Could their songs travel underwater? If sung near swamps? Did baby lemurs learn to sing from their mothers like human infants do? Did some have dialects, regional choruses, battle cries? It's enough to keep a graduate student awake at night and probably has. Your flashlight flickers slightly, casting long stretched shadows that dance across the trees like puppet theater. You let it go dark for a moment just to test your ears. There's that night breeze again. The creak of branches. Somewhere far off, maybe a distant bird. But for the most part, it's quiet. Too quiet. You wouldn't be the first to say so. In recent decades, ecologists have started referring to acoustic deserts, places where biodiversity loss has made nature eerily silent. Forests once thick with birds, frogs, and mammals now sound like empty rooms. It's the sonic version of staring into an abandoned building. Parts of Madagascar are becoming acoustic deserts. And in a painfully ironic twist, some of the richest forests once bursting with singing lemurs are now the quietest. Still, some try to fight back. Conservationists have installed audio monitors in key regions listening day and night for even the faintest calls. There's a program where schoolchildren help catalog these sounds. They wear headphones, listen to hours of chirps and hoots and tag anything unusual. And every once in a while, a strange tone slips through. A call that doesn't match any known database. It could be a rare bird, or a misrecorded frog, or maybe just maybe a lingering lullaby from a species not entirely gone. You smile, because we'll always chase the song. We're wired for it. Even in the silence we search for rhythm. And that's the twist in this story. The singing lemurs are extinct, but the echoes are still here. You hear it again. Not the song of the lemurs. No, that ship sailed 1,000 years ago. But the forest is murmuring something different now. It's the rustle of leaves like whispered gossip, the dry snap of a twig under something not quite your weight, the soft rolling hush of wind moving through branches. The forest talks if you know how to listen. And sometimes it even remembers. So tonight, you wade deeper into one of the strangest layers of this story folklore. Myths, stories, half-truths, and full-on bedtime lies that echo the ghosts of the singing lemurs long after their bones turn to dust. Here's the mainstream historical fact for you. Malagasy oral tradition is one of the richest in Africa. Entire dynasties, genealogies, and histories were preserved not in books, but in kabari rhythmic speeches, passed from elders to children, generation to generation. That means if the singing lemurs left an impression, it wouldn't be in a fossil, it'd be in a story. And oh, what stories! There's one told in the highlands about a group of forest spirits called the Kalanoro. Tiny humanoid creatures no taller than a child, with long hair and piercing eyes. They're said to sing in perfect harmony from treetops during the new moon. Travelers who hear the song mustn't follow it, because those who do are never seen again. Sound familiar? Historians still argue whether these Kalanoro tales are echoes of extinct lemurs or something entirely separate. Some anthropologists point out that the descriptions of these spirits match some early colonial sketches of sloth lemurs. Long-limbed, tree-dwelling, weirdly graceful. And the singing, well, oral traditions are funny like that they stretch and bend, but sometimes they hold a kernel of truth. Then there's the Ampanjaka, or forest kings. Ancient legends describe them as guardians of sacred groves. They didn't speak, they sang. Their songs healed wounds, summoned rain, and calmed wild animals. Once, they say, a young girl trespassed into their sacred clearing and was met not with anger but with a lullaby so beautiful she forgot her own name. Scholars today believe these legends may represent a cultural memory of the harmony-singing lemurs. It's entirely possible, they say, that communities who lived near their habitats integrated their nightly duets into religious or ceremonial beliefs. After all, when you hear a wild, unexplainable song echoing through the misty jungle at dusk, your brain doesn't file that under zoology, it files it under magic. Here's a quirky tidbit to make things even stranger. In 1962, a French missionary recorded an account from a Malagasy elder who spoke of the little furred priests of the canopy. These beings, he said, would sing as the sun rose, and if you dared interrupt them, they would curse your tongue into silence. That's oddly specific. There are, of course, more grounded interpretations. Maybe the lemurs were never seen clearly. Maybe their singing drifted through the mist and got attributed to spirits or gods. Because, well, that's what humans do. We anthropomorphize. We turn mystery into metaphor. If a singing creature vanishes and no one wrote it down, it morphs into a fairy, a demon, a tree-dwelling monk. Now, not every story was reverent. Some were warnings. You lean against a cool stone, slick with moss and age, and think of the tale of Hasofotsi, the cursed forest where children vanish. It's said that during full moons, long-armed shadows stretch across the canopy and sing songs in impossible keys. Those who hear them fall into trances and wander off, never to return. No one remembers where this tale began. But the long arms part, yeah, that matches Paleopropithecus. Proportions a little too well. What's remarkable is that even today, some villagers in isolated regions of Madagascar will nod solemnly when asked about the forest singers. They don't always believe it literally, but they remember. The melody remains even if the source is forgotten. You probably didn't expect ghosts in a bedtime story about lemurs, but here we are. The line between science and myth is gossamer thin. And in Madagascar, it's often blurred on purpose, because there's power in mystery. One local guide once said to a researcher, "If you call it extinct, people forget. But if you call it a forest god, they protect it." Think about that. Now, not all of this is melancholy. Some of it's hilarious. One 19th century traveler wrote of a local belief that some lemurs were shapeshifters, harmless by day, pranksters by night. They'd sneak into huts and rearrange furniture-tangled fishing nets, or even steal bananas from pockets. That sounds less like zoology, and more like the antics of your one chaotic uncle at family reunions. But even these playful myths serve a purpose. They remind us that these animals weren't just specimens. They were part of a living world, woven into the daily lives, dreams, and superstitions of a people. And when the lemurs vanished, the stories didn't. They just changed costumes. You lift your hand and let a breeze slide through your fingers, almost expecting it to hum. And maybe it does. Or maybe your tired brain is hearing what it wants to hear. But either way, the forest holds these songs like a diary written in fog and memory. And that leads us to something even stranger, a modern echo of these myths. In recent years, a few indie artists and composers have begun incorporating Malagasy forest folklore into ambient soundscapes. One album quietly released on Bandcamp attempts to recreate the imagined sound of extinct lemur songs using throat singing, traditional Malagasy instruments, and field recordings of wind through tree canopies. The effect is haunting. It doesn't sound like any one animal, it sounds like memory. There's a movement in speculative ecology now too. Artists and scientists collaborating to reimagine lost species through sound and story. They call it mythopoetic rewilding, basically using art and myth to fill the holes science can't yet. So here we are, standing in the dark with legends brushing past your ankles like invisible cats, lemurs that became lullabies, songs that survived extinction just by changing shape. The forest grows quiet again. The real kind of quiet. Not because there's nothing left, but because the next verse is yours to hum. You're starting to realize something. This isn't just the story of an extinct animal. It's a detective mystery, a myth, and now, somehow, a time capsule sealed in trees. Because even after songs fade and bones crumble, one thing keeps on talking: the trees. Tonight, you're slipping back into the understory, but not to look at animals. You're here to examine the landscape, the environment that once held the singing lemurs like a stage, remembers the play long after the actors have gone. Let's ground this with a mainstream fact. Madagascar is a global biodiversity hotspot, home to more endemic species than almost anywhere else on Earth. Over 90% of its wildlife is found nowhere else. That includes the lemurs, but also the forests they once danced through. And no, this wasn't your average forest. This was an evolutionary sandbox. A choose-your-own-adventure book for life itself. The singing lemurs didn't evolve in a vacuum. They were shaped by colossal trees, peculiar weather patterns, and ecological drama on a scale fit for Greek theater. The rainforest canopy was their concert hall. The high branches gave them space to leap, echo, and perform. The dense foliage dulled outside noise, amplifying their harmonies. And let's not forget the weird flora baobabs that looked like they'd been planted upside down, strangler figs that twisted around trunks like jealous snakes, orchids that bloomed once and then never again. You brush aside a curtain of vines, and it smells like green tea and old rain. Somewhere beneath your boots, there's a layer of decomposing leaves millennia deep, possibly hiding ancient seeds, fallen nests, or maybe, just maybe, a forgotten femur. Now for a quirky tidbit. Madagascar's spiny forest is so strange, botanists sometimes refer to it as an alien world. The trees there aren't soft and welcoming, they're covered in daggers. Some scholars theorize that this evolved to deter the now extinct elephant birds and giant lemurs from munching everything to stumps. So in a way, the trees remember the megafauna they're scarred by them. Historians still argue whether certain types of trees co-evolved with the singing lemurs specifically. Were there mutualistic relationships? Did one species of tree flourish because lemurs spread its seeds while bouncing from branch to branch, vocalizing about fruit taxes and leaf inflation? We don't know. Some ecologists swear it happened. Others demand hard data. But the timing's curious. Some trees began to decline around the same time the large lemurs disappeared. And that brings us to the ghosts of the forest. The ecological shadows, as one poet-turned-botanist put it. You see, when a species vanishes, it doesn't just leave a hole in the food chain. It leaves awkward silences, unripe fruit that falls uneaten, trees that don't travel anymore because no one spreads their seeds. In Madagascar, scientists have traced these silences, places where a tree should be thriving but isn't, or where saplings sprout but never reach maturity. It's like the plants are waiting for a partner who stood them up 1,000 years ago. And this is where it gets a little poetic. Picture a fig tree hundreds of years old, still producing fruit high in the canopy. Its seeds are coated in a sticky outer shell that once needed to be scraped by the tongue of a now extinct lemur. Without that specific action, the seeds can't grow. So the tree just keeps trying, over and over, like a love letter written to someone who doesn't live there anymore. It's kind of tragic and kind of beautiful. And yet, not all hope is lost. Some animals have stepped into the roles left behind. Humans, birds, even surviving lemur cousins. But it's not a perfect handoff, it's a stage production, with understudies scrambling for lines. You can tell something's missing. Now here's where it gets even stranger. Some researchers have suggested using robotic lemurs or sound projectors to recreate the singing calls in specific forest patches. Not to fool anyone, but to see if certain trees respond. It's experimental ecology meets avant-garde theater. No one knows if it'll work. But the idea of calling out into the woods using an extinct animal's voice and waiting to see what grows, that's peak sci-fi meets rainforest. Let's also talk about lemur-built architecture. No, they didn't wear hard hats or pour concrete, but their movements shaped the forest. Some trees grew crooked because lemurs bounced on them. Trails were worn into the underbrush by repeated use. Nests carved hollows into tree trunks that now shelter birds and bugs. Their echoes are still physically there, you just need to know where to look. And the climate, the climate is a whole other character in this story. Madagascar has seen dramatic shifts over the past 2 millennia. Warming periods, droughts, unpredictable monsoon seasons. The singing lemurs didn't just die off because of hunting. Their ecosystem was squeezed and bent like a paper fan. Eventually, some habitats snapped. Historians still debate whether climate change was the primary culprit or just the final nudge. Maybe the lemurs could have weathered the storm if their trees hadn't vanished first. Maybe it was all a cascading collapse. A falling domino of leaves, limbs, and lungs. You step over a mossy log and realize it's not just the lemurs we lost. We lost an entire rhythm. A call and response between species, seasons, and soil. And somehow, knowing that makes the silence louder. But here's something odd in deforested areas, where humans now plant vanilla or coffee. Some of the ghost species of trees still grow along the margins, as if they're hanging around hoping for a comeback tour. So what do you do with a landscape that remembers? Some ecologists are trying to rewild Madagascar, not by cloning extinct lemurs yet, but by planting their favorite trees, protecting the last scraps of old-growth forest, and studying how modern lemurs might learn the old songs. Because here's the hopeful note. Evolution doesn't stop. Maybe, just maybe, another species will evolve into a singer. Maybe a distant cousin of the old lemurs will rediscover the harmonies. Maybe the trees are just waiting for a new duet partner. You pause under a tree with bark like crocodile skin and listen. It's quiet, yes, but not empty. Somewhere nearby, a bird warbles a melody that doesn't quite belong. It sounds off-key, but you smile anyway. Maybe that's how the next song starts. You've got dirt on your boots now, jungle moss under your fingernails. And whether you meant to or not, you've been pulled into something much bigger than lemurs. Because the forest doesn't just whisper about the past, it starts pointing fingers. Tonight, you step into the part of the story where the echoes grow sharper. Where paradise doesn't just fade, it burns floods and gets bulldozed in broad daylight. This is the human chapter. And it's not always a flattering one. Let's anchor in with a mainstream fact. Humans have lived in Madagascar for at least 2,000 years, possibly more. But even with that relatively recent arrival, they've managed to dramatically reshape the island's ecology. Some scholars suggest that over 80% of Madagascar's original forests are gone, banished, poof. And along with those forests went entire animal lineages, including our tragic tenors, the singing lemurs. Now, people didn't arrive on the island with evil intentions. They brought livestock fire for cooking and farming tools. But they also brought change. Massive, sweeping, fast change. Slash and burn agriculture, known locally as tabi, was used to clear patches of forest for crops. It worked until it didn't. Here's a quirky tidbit. In some oral traditions from Malagasy communities, spirits of the forest, Kalanoro, were believed to cry out when trees were felled. Some stories say these forest spirits went silent when too many trees were cut, as if mourning. So even in folklore, there's a thread of ecological awareness. Historians still argue whether early human settlers knew the impact they were having. Did they notice species vanishing? Did they grieve the sudden absence of certain songs at dusk? Some think, yes, small local taboos. against hunting specific animals hint at a kind of folk conservation. Others believe the pace of change simply overwhelmed any attempts at balance. You walk through a clearing now. The canopy is broken. The air is hotter. The soil underfoot is dry, cracked, like a jigsaw puzzle that's lost its picture. Once this spot might have echoed with lemur music. Now the only rhythm comes from distant motorcycles and the soft clatter of plastic wrappers. But let's not scapegoat the past without looking at the mirror. Because the damage didn't stop with early settlers. Over the centuries, Madagascar became a crossroads of trade. Arab merchants, Portuguese explorers, French colonizers, and with each wave came new pressures, timber extraction, mining, cash crop plantations, you name it. The forest was not only a home, it was a commodity. And the lemurs, they became a curiosity, a delicacy, a pet, a shadow in the marketplace. Their habitats were slashed to make way for sugarcane, then for cattle grazing, then for illegal rosewood logging. It's easy to feel furious. But also, you understand. These weren't cartoon villains. These were people trying to survive, feed families, and adapt in a world that kept changing the rules. And sometimes the cost was paid by creatures who couldn't argue back. You sit on a rock sweating in the afternoon sun, and imagine a lemur call drifting through this ghost forest 1,000 years ago. It probably sounded ridiculous, joyful, like something between a squeaky saxophone and a child imitating a siren. And it was silenced by a dozen subtle choices. A tree cut here, a road built there, a policy drafted in a colonial office hundreds of miles away. No one flipped a switch. They just drifted. But not everything was mindless. In fact, in some pockets of Madagascar, the singing lemurs held on far longer than expected thanks to sacred groves. These were forest patches protected by spiritual belief rather than science. No one dared cut a tree or hunt inside them. And these groves, they became accidental arcs. One remote village passed down songs about animals that sounded like singing monkeys. Researchers who visited in the 1950s dismissed it as imagination. Now some think those tales might have been the last whispers of the singing lemurs. And it gets more complex. Fast forward to the modern day. Madagascar is one of the poorest countries on Earth. Conservation is hard when you're hungry. Try telling a starving child that she can't fish in the protected river or gather firewood from the reserve. Try explaining extinction to someone who just needs rice. It's not that people don't care. They care deeply. But systems matter. Education, governance, funding. These are the scaffolds of successful conservation. And when they break, the forest pays first. Still, signs of hope persist. You pass a hand-painted sign nailed to a tree stump, Lemurs, Rest Future. Around it, young students are planting saplings, their uniforms dusty but eyes bright. Some of them have never seen a lemur outside of textbooks. But they plant anyway. Here's something beautiful. Local conservation groups have started recording the traditional songs and stories passed down about the lemurs. Not the actual animal calls, those are gone, but human interpretations of them. Sung by grandmothers, whispered by firelight. They're saving what can be saved, not just with science, but with memory. One Malagasy musician recently composed an entire album inspired by lost animal voices. The lemur track, it's haunting. It starts with silence. Then comes a slow beat, like feet bouncing in trees. Then layered harmonies echoing upward into nothing. You'd cry if you weren't so sweaty right now. And here's the kicker. In a highland market town, a carving stall sells wooden statues of lemurs, big eyes, open mouths, frozen mid-song. Some buyers think they're just cute decorations. Others believe carving their image keeps their spirits alive. The vendor winks at you. They sang for the trees, he says. Now the trees sing for them. It's a lovely thought. Maybe a little poetic, maybe a little made up, but you want to believe it. You really do. Because if history teaches anything, it's this extinction isn't just an ending, it's a haunting. A lesson carved into bark and etched into bones. It's the echo you still hear when the band has long packed up and left the stage. And you're still here, walking among the empty seats, waiting for the encore that may never come. The forest behind you hums with old regrets. But now you step into a quieter kind of mystery. No less tragic, just less obvious. If the last chapter was a firestorm of chainsaws and cleared trees, this one is all about shadows. About bones. About what scientists call subfossils, which, to be clear, are just polite ways of saying not quite rotted enough. Welcome to the part of the journey where lemur ghosts stop being just legends and become testable, pokeable, measurable things. You crouch beside a shallow excavation pit, brush in hand, sifting through layers of dry soil until your fingertips strike something smooth. A jawbone, too small to be a monkey, too big to be a mouse, perfectly lemur. Mainstream fact first, Madagascar is home to an extensive record of subfossil lemur remains, dating back tens of thousands of years. These remains include skulls, limbs, teeth, and even bits of hair and dung preserved in dry caves, riverbeds, and sediment layers like time capsules. And among these remains, species, unlike anything alive today. Lemurs that stood upright, lemurs with koala-thick forearms, lemurs with the stature of human toddlers. And yes, even lemurs whose hyoid bones suggest complex vocal ranges, possible early echoes of musical communication. The singing lemurs might not be a myth after all. They're just buried. Here's your quirky tidbit. One extinct lemur, Paleopropithecus, known as the sloth lemur, had such oddly curved limb bones that early paleontologists mistook it for a small ground-dwelling bear. Others nicknamed it Lemur Kong. It probably moves slowly through the trees like a dancer in molasses, and if it ever sang, you'd hear it long before you saw it. Historians still argue whether the singing lemurs represent one species or a cluster of separate lineages. Some suggest their song behavior evolved multiple times in different families. Others think it belonged to a single now-vanished genus, wiped out quickly enough to leave us grasping at fragments. You kneel deeper into the dig, a tooth here, a femur there. You imagine the skeleton reassembling in your mind, cartoon style clicking into place, like a jigsaw puzzle powered by curiosity. Some bones are big, implying weighty, slow-moving creatures. Others are delicate, hinting at agile climbers. What you don't find is sound, because sound doesn't fossilize. But then again, echoes sometimes linger in the strangest ways. Enter the scientists with computers. Researchers have taken fossilized lemur vocal tracts, mainly the hyoid bone, that weird U-shaped thing in your neck that helps you talk, and digitally reconstructed how extinct lemurs might have sounded. Using modeling software, they simulate vocalizations, deep booms, throaty howls, and even rhythmic clicks. One simulation published just a few years ago posits that a certain extinct species possibly related to the modern Indri had a range similar to a French horn. Think about that. A lemur hooting from a treetop, channeling something between Miles Davis and a ship foghorn in stereo. It's speculative, sure, But science often begins where imagination gets tired. As you walk through the lab, you pass CT scans of lemur skulls, lit from within like tiny haunted houses. Some researchers joke that the lab's mascot is a ghost lemur that only sings when no one's looking. Others are more serious. They talk about acoustic niche, modeling, vocal performance theory, and comparative throat structures. But you just close your eyes and try to hear it. The paleobotanists across the hall are busy too. Because sound isn't the only thing that doesn't fossilize. Trees don't survive well either. But pollen does. And if you analyze pollen deposits from ancient sediment layers, you can figure out what kind of forest once surrounded these animals. Turns out, many singing lemur sites overlap with dense, acoustically rich forests, perfect for echoing long calls across canopies. So maybe they weren't just noisy for fun. Maybe song was survival. Like territory mapping made signaling predator warnings. Or maybe it was more. Maybe, as some fringe researchers claim, lemurs use song the way whales do. To build family bonds, soothe infants, or mourn the dead. Don't laugh. Stranger things have been proposed. You come across one unpublished paper scratched in pencil on the edge of a researcher's notebook that dares to ask, could extinct lemurs have developed rhythmic mimicry from environmental sounds? In other words, did the forest inspire their beat? The dripping of water, the clack of bamboo in the wind, the rhythm of rain. Is it so wild to think that over generations a creature might copy its world back to itself? You sit on the lab bench staring at a broken pelvis on display and realize something. This isn't just forensic work. It's music archaeology. Every bone, every scrape, is one pixel in a forgotten song. And you're just trying to hit play again. The funny part, we still don't know if we found all the bones. Madagascar is full of unexplored cave systems and cliffside crevices. Some subfossils were discovered by accident, dug up by kids, kicked loose by goats. One site was found when a researcher slipped on bat guano and fell straight into a skull nest. True story. Even stranger, some subfossils have turned up in places where modern lemurs no longer live. This implies that entire ecological zones have shifted. The map has redrawn itself and the singers got left behind. In your dream tonight, you might find one of those caves. Step softly into the twilight zone, brush aside a veil of spider webs, and see them rows of lemur skeletons, all posed mid-song, mouths agape, hands lifted like a fossilized choir, waiting for applause. Of course, that's just your imagination. Probably. Still, the work goes on. Teams from Madagascar, France, the US, and beyond collaborate on decoding these bones. Some are carbon dated. Others are DNA sampled. And bit by bit, a portrait emerges not of one single singer, but of a whole genre. A lost radio station fading into static. Now, here's a twist. One recently recovered subfossil from the northwestern coast had strange ridges on its palate. No other lemur living or extinct shares that trait. Some believe it helped modify vocal pitch. Others think it was just a genetic fluke. Either way, that one fragment has launched 3 separate grant proposals, 2 heated academic feuds, and 1 very dramatic conference walkout. Because when it comes to lost animals, everyone wants to be the one who found the missing note. And you're just grateful to be listening. The sun dips low outside and you find yourself wandering into the realms of culture and myth. Because while bones and forests tell a scientific tale, stories, those whispered at firesides and sung through generations, carry the soul of the singing lemurs. You've now stepped into their afterlife, the way humans remember, mourn, and sometimes romanticize extinct creatures. Let's start with the fact the Malagasy people have a rich tradition of storytelling that intertwines animals with ancestors, spirits, and moral lessons. Lemurs in particular feature prominently as tricksters, guardians, or messengers between worlds. Some tribes believe that certain lemurs were reincarnations of lost family members, keeping the connection alive between past and present. A quirky bit, there's a local legend about a forest choir that would sing at midnight, led by a giant lemur with a golden mane. Villagers say the sound was so enchanting it could cure sadness, or even call rain. No one's heard it for centuries, but every full moon, children leave out offerings, fruit and honey, hoping for a glimpse or a note. Historians still argue whether these legends are direct memories of now extinct species or purely symbolic tales created after their disappearance. Some suggest the stories arose as a cultural mechanism to cope with loss, while others believe they might preserve actual ecological knowledge passed down through oral tradition. You imagine sitting by a crackling fire in a Malagasy village. The night is alive with insects, the scent of roasted cassava, and the low hum of conversation. An elder begins to sing, voice wavering but filled with warmth, weaving tales where singing lemurs are not just animals but spirits guiding the people through hardship and hope. In fact, some anthropologists note that the very rhythms of Malagasy folk music mimic lemur calls, suggesting a deep auditory heritage that might stretch back millennia. The songs aren't just entertainment, they're sonic time capsules. It's not just stories. Some sacred sites in Madagascar remain protected not because of government laws, but because they're believed to be the resting places of these animal spirits. Cutting a tree there might anger ancestors or unleash misfortune. These cultural practices, though fragile, have helped preserve patches of forest against encroachment. Yet, tension exists. Modern pressures often clash with tradition. As globalization seeps in younger generations, sometimes view these tales as old-fashioned, even embarrassing. Conservationists worry that losing cultural memory might weaken efforts to protect the environment. But resilience shows itself in unexpected ways. Young Malagasy artists, blending hip-hop with folk traditions, are reviving lemur legends in their music, giving them new life on digital platforms. Suddenly, extinct animals become symbols of identity and pride, rather than just relics. You picture yourself scrolling through a social feed where a viral video features dancers embodying lemur calls with rhythmic stomps and howls. The hashtag Lemur Legacy. And here's an open question. How much of what we call extinction is also a cultural disappearance? When an animal vanishes from the wild, does it also vanish from human hearts and stories? Or can stories keep the song alive long after the last note fades? Maybe that's the real magic of the singing lemurs, not their biology, but their enduring presence in human imagination. So as you close your eyes tonight, hear those ancient songs threading through time, carried by winds, whispers, and hopeful voices, reminding us that even in loss, there's a kind of living memory. You step quietly into the domain of explorers, those daring souls who centuries ago first set foot on Madagascar and encountered the island's mysterious wildlife. Their journals, full of wonder and bewilderment, offer a vivid snapshot of a world on the cusp of change, where singing lemurs still hum through the canopy, if only barely. A solid historical fact. The first European to describe Madagascar's unique fauna in detail was the French naturalist Pierre Sonnerat in the late 18th century. His travelogue included early mentions of lemurs, Though he never witnessed the extinct giant lemurs firsthand, he described the smaller lemurs as nimble little musicians of the forest, a phrase that stuck in early scientific circles. Now, the quirky tidbit. Some early explorers carried lemur pelts and bones back to Europe, which soon became prized curiosities among aristocrats and collectors. One particularly eccentric French nobleman reportedly attempted to teach a captive lemur to whistle, convinced it would perform melodies to rival the court's finest musicians. Spoiler, it didn't work out. Historians still argue whether some of the earliest explorers' reports were exaggerated or romanticized, blurring the line between fact and fiction. Were the singing descriptions based on actual vocalizations, or were they poetic interpretations of eerie calls heard in the dark? The truth may lie somewhere in between. As you leaf through a worn copy of Sonnerat's journal, you can almost hear the crackle of campfires and the murmur of conversation filled with awe and superstition. He writes about hearing voices from the treetops which local attributed to the forest spirits. European scientists, meanwhile, sought to classify these voices within the framework of Linnaean taxonomy, often missing the cultural significance altogether. You imagine the challenges these early naturalists faced: tropical diseases, rough terrain, language barriers, and the ever-present danger of wild animals. Despite this, they documented enough to spark curiosity that eventually led to the discovery of subfossils and a deeper understanding of Madagascar's extinct fauna. And there's an ongoing scholarly debate about the impact these early encounters had on indigenous knowledge systems. Some argue that the imposition of Western scientific categories disrupted traditional ways of knowing and led to the loss of certain oral histories, while others believe it helped preserve aspects of biodiversity through written records. Fast forward to the 20th century, when researchers armed with better tools began piecing together the puzzle of extinct lemurs. Expeditions led by paleontologists like Charles Lamberton and more recently Elwyn Simons brought scientific rigor, but also a new wave of ethical considerations regarding the local communities and ecosystems. You reflect on how exploration itself is a double-edged sword. It can reveal lost worlds but also accelerate their disappearance. One fascinating side note: a 19th century traveler noted that the calls of the eerie, the largest living lemur, were so loud and haunting that local sailors used them as natural alarms, timing their voyages by the sound's early morning echoes. Could this practical use of animal songs hint at why singing lemurs evolved such powerful vocalizations? As you close the explorer's journal, you realize that every page is a fragile bridge between eras, between wild singing forests and silent empty ones, and every voice recorded, whether literal or metaphorical, adds another layer to the story you're unraveling. You turn off your reading lamp and listen to the distant creak of the house, settling the faint hum of the night, and in your mind the faintest hint of a lemur song. You're now sliding into the scientific laboratories and dusty university halls where researchers labor over bones, DNA strands, and ancient pollen. This is the backstage of Extinction, the microscopic details and analytical breakthroughs that piece together the life and loss of singing lemurs. Here's a mainstream fact: advances in radiocarbon dating have allowed scientists to pinpoint the extinction of many giant lemurs to roughly 501,000 years ago, coinciding suspiciously with the arrival of humans on Madagascar. This timeline suggests a strong link between human activity and the animal's disappearance. But here's something a little quirky. In one unusual study, Researchers found that the chemicals in lemur bones absorbed different mineral signatures depending on their diet and environment, effectively turning the bones into chemical diaries of ancient forest conditions. It's like the lemurs kept a geological journal you never asked for. Historians and paleontologists still argue whether climate shifts or human hunting played the bigger role in these extinctions. Some propose that Madagascar's climate was already changing before humans arrived, creating harsher conditions that prime species for decline. Others emphasize overhunting and habitat destruction as the main culprits. It's a debate that's far from settled. Picture yourself in a lab under soft fluorescent lights, peering at a fragile skull through a microscope. The bone's texture tells stories of age injury, maybe even disease. Nearby, a computer runs models simulating how forest loss, fragmented habitats, and isolated lemur populations making survival a steep uphill battle. One fascinating discovery involved the genetic sequencing of subfossil lemur DNA. It revealed unexpected relationships between extinct and living species, reshaping the lemur family tree. Turns out some of the giant lemurs were more closely related to today's tiny mouse lemurs than previously thought, a surprising twist that makes you question what size really means in evolution. There's also debate around the role of fire. Some scientists argue that early human settlers used fire to clear land, inadvertently wiping out vast swaths of lemur habitat. Others believe natural wildfires had already been shaping the landscape for centuries, making it tough to isolate human influence. The quirky side of this, at one point, researchers experimented with reconstructing lemur vocalizations based on skull and hyoid bone structures. Imagine a robotic lemur crooning its long-lost melodies, a project that sounds more like sci-fi than science, but could bring us closer to understanding their famed singing. You consider how far science has come from guessing extinction dates to reconstructing songs. Yet the deeper you dig, the more questions arise, proving the process is as much art as it is empirical evidence. Finally, it's worth pondering. Does knowing the molecular story of extinction make the loss more real? Or does it turn a living creature into nothing more than a lab specimen? Your mind drifts back to the forests, imagining the songs fading as time ticks on. The breeze rustles through the imagined branches above as you dive into the ecological tapestry that once supported the singing lemurs, a world where every creature, plant, and microbe played a role in a delicate balance. Understanding their environment is like unraveling a complex symphony where each note mattered. A solid fact to keep in mind: Madagascar's forests are some of the most biologically diverse on Earth, home to thousands of unique species. The singing lemurs thrived in dense, humid rainforests, relying heavily on the abundance of fruit leaves and flowers that made up their diet. Here's a quirky ecological detail. Some giant lemurs were known to act as ecosystem engineers, much like beavers in North America. Their foraging habits help disperse seeds and shape forest composition. When they vanished, entire tree species might have struggled to regenerate, subtly reshaping the landscape. Historians and ecologists still argue whether the loss of these megafauna caused a cascade of ecological changes that accelerated forest decline, or if deforestation by humans was the primary driver. Was it the classic chicken and egg scenario of environmental collapse? Imagine yourself wandering the old-growth forests, leaves damp beneath your feet, listening to the layered chorus of birds and insects. Once, the singing lemurs would have added their voices a chorus, punctuated by deep, resonant calls bouncing through the canopy. Scientists suggest that their powerful songs serve to mark territory, attract mates, and maintain social cohesion. But recent research points to an even more intriguing possibility. These vocalizations may have coordinated group movements and warn against predators, acting like a living forest radio. Here's a fascinating fringe idea. Some ecologists hypothesize that the lemurs singing had a role in synchronizing the behaviors of other species like a natural metronome keeping the forest's pulse steady. If true, their extinction may have caused subtle disruptions rippling through the ecosystem. You pause to consider how this complex web of life depended on more than just individual species. It required interaction and balance. The disappearance of the singing lemurs was more than a lost voice. It was a missing link in the forest's communication network. One must also note that human-driven habitat fragmentation left survivors isolated in shrinking patches of forest, making it impossible for population to recover. The mosaic of human and natural forces created a perfect storm. Yet there is hope. Reforestation efforts and protected areas are slowly restoring some habitats, inviting a faint possibility of ecological revival. Perhaps someday echoes of the past will resonate once more, carried by new generations of animals and plants. And as you close your eyes tonight, imagine the forest, breathing alive with secrets waiting for you to listen closely, perhaps even hum along. You find yourself drifting into the modern world where conservationists and scientists scramble to learn from past extinctions and save what's left. The story of the singing lemurs is no longer just about loss, it's about hope, effort, and sometimes bittersweet victories. A grounded fact here today: lemurs as a whole are among the most endangered mammals on Earth, with more than 90% of species threatened by habitat destruction, hunting, and climate change. Madagascar's forests are shrinking faster than ever, making the preservation of lemur habitats a global priority. Here's an odd but inspiring detail. Some conservation groups used lemur ambassadors in zoos, worldwide friendly, charismatic lemurs, who help raise awareness and funds for their wild relatives. These lemurs sometimes become minor celebrities, participating in educational videos, even getting their own social media accounts. You could say they're the original influencers long before Instagram. There's an ongoing scholarly debate about the best conservation approaches, whether focusing on charismatic megafauna like lemurs garners enough public support, or whether protecting broader ecosystems is more effective. Some argue that saving lemurs alone won't fix the forest, while others insist that lemurs are a flagship species whose survival benefits many others. Imagine yourself trekking through a protected Malagasy reserve, the sun filtering through tall trees, as you hear the call of a living eerie, one of the closest things to the singing lemurs of old. It's both a beautiful and haunting reminder of what remains and what's been lost. Conservationists employ a range of tools, satellite imagery, to track deforestation, community-based programs, encouraging sustainable farming, and even reforestation projects involving native species. It's a complex puzzle where biology, economics, and culture collide. A quirky project involved training local communities to create lemur-friendly honey by avoiding tree destruction. It's a sweet example of how human livelihoods and wildlife protection can align in unexpected ways. But there's a darker side. Illegal logging, slash and burn, agriculture, and political instability sometimes undermine these efforts. The battle to save Madagascar's biodiversity is not just ecological, but also social and political. You also hear about a small group of scientists trying to extract ancient lemur DNA to explore the extinction possibilities. While controversial and ethically complex, the idea sparks imagination. Could technology one day bring back the lost chorus? Yet, many caution that bringing back an extinct species without restoring its habitat might only create a ghost in a cage. It reminds you that extinction isn't just a biological event. It's a story woven into human responsibility. As you sit quietly, you think about your own role. Maybe it's as simple as spreading awareness, supporting conservation efforts, or just listening more closely to the natural world. And perhaps that's the key lesson of the singing lemurs. Their voices, once lost, can still inspire us to protect the songs still being sung. You slip now into the realm of cultural echoes, how the singing lemurs live on, not only in science, but in the stories, myths, and art of Madagascar's people. Their voices silenced in nature reverberate through human imagination. Here's a straightforward fact. Malagasy folklore is rich with tales of lemurs, often portraying them as spiritual guardians, tricksters, or ancestors. These stories have been passed down orally for centuries, weaving lemurs into the island's cultural fabric. A quirky cultural tidbit. Some Malagasy communities believe that hearing a lemur's call at night is a sign of impending change, either good fortune or a warning. This superstition gave lemurs an almost mystical status, a natural alarm clock with a message you didn't want to ignore. Historians and anthropologists still debate whether these legends evolved as metaphors for ecological knowledge or as pure mythological invention. Some suggest that oral traditions preserved clues about extinct species' behaviors and habitats, while others see them as symbolic stories unrelated to biology. You imagine yourself sitting by a fire with a Malagasy storyteller, the crackling flames casting shadows as you listen to tales of the forest singers' creatures that bridge the human and animal worlds. These stories often highlight themes of respect for nature and the consequences of greed. Interestingly, some modern Malagasy artists incorporate lemur motifs in their work, sculptures, textiles, and music, keeping the memory alive in contemporary culture. In one quirky art project, musicians recreated lemur calls using traditional instruments, blending ancestral soundscapes with modern creativity. There's also a growing movement among Malagasy youth to reconnect with their natural heritage using digital media to share conservation messages inspired by these ancient stories. It's a fusion of old and new, echoing the lemurs' timeless songs. A debated point remains: how much has the loss of these creatures affected Malagasy cultural identity? Some argue that as lemurs disappear, so too does a vital part of the island's soul, while others maintain that culture adapts and survives, finding new ways to honor nature. You think about how storytelling itself is a form of survival, a way to keep voices alive even when bodies are gone. The singing lemurs, though extinct, sing on through these human narratives. As you prepare to drift, you reflect on how deeply intertwined nature and culture truly are, each shaping the other in an endless dance. And maybe, just maybe, listening to these stories is a way of bringing the singing lemurs back to life, at least for a little while. You glide next into the intricate world of Madagascar's climate history, a slow-motion backdrop where changing temperatures, shifting rainfall, and evolving landscapes quietly shape the fate of the singing lemurs and their forest homes. Here's a solid fact. Geological studies show that Madagascar's climate has fluctuated dramatically over the last several thousand years, cycling through wetter and drier periods that altered the extent and composition of its forests. A quirky detail: some researchers discovered fossilized pollen grains trapped in lake sediments, revealing that ancient forests might have looked very different, full of strange tree species that no longer exist, like botanical time capsules buried in mud. Historians and climatologists still debate how much these natural climate shifts versus human-induced changes contributed to the loss of giant lemurs. Was it a one-two punch of nature's slow pressure and human disruption, or something more catastrophic? Imagine yourself standing at the edge of a prehistoric lake, the air thick with humidity, surrounded by towering trees, and listening to distant lemur calls. You'd hardly guess that beneath this lush scene, the climate was preparing to rearrange the very foundation of life. One study suggests that during drier periods, forests contracted into isolated patches, forcing lemurs into ever smaller refuges. This made populations vulnerable to inbreeding disease and ultimately extinction, a concept ecologists call habitat fragmentation, a phrase you might hear buzzing in conservation circles today. A fun but odd detail: some scientists use computer models to recreate ancient Madagascar climates, complete with virtual lemurs hopping between simulated trees, like a Jurassic Park for primates. It sounds whimsical, but helps test hypotheses about species survival under different environmental stresses. There's an ongoing debate about whether early human settlers inadvertently accelerated climate change through land clearing and agriculture. Some argue that slash and burn practices triggered more intense dry spells, while others claim these effects were minimal compared to global patterns. As you picture the changing skies and shifting landscapes, it's humbling to realize how finely tuned ecosystems are to climate rhythms and how vulnerable they become when that rhythm is disturbed. This whole chapter of climate history reminds you that extinction isn't just about predators or hunting, it's about a planet that moves and breathes, often in ways beyond our full understanding. The singing lemur's disappearance may be a story of survival and loss, written by the earth itself with humans as unwitting scribes, in a complex and fragile narrative. And as you lay back, you can almost feel the cool breeze of ancient Madagascar brushing your skin, carrying the whispers of a world that once was. Now you settle into the fascinating science of how researchers piece together the lives of these vanished creatures like detectives, solving a mystery that spans millennia. The evidence lies: scattered bones, teeth, fragments of fur trapped in amber, and most intriguingly, their songs recorded only in memory and imagination. A straightforward fact: paleontologists have uncovered partial skeletons of giant lemurs in cave deposits and ancient riverbeds, providing clues to their size, diet, and even how they moved through the trees. A quirky research tidbit: in some digs, scientists have found ancient lemur footprints fossilized in hardened mud like ghostly snapshots of moments from thousands of years ago. There's even a whimsical rumor that one footprint looks suspiciously like it was made by a lemur with extra toes, sparking debate about unknown species. Historians and scientists still argue over how to interpret these clues. For instance, some fossil evidence suggests certain species might have been nocturnal, while others say they were active during the day, debates that affect our understanding of their behavior and ecology. Imagine standing beside a researcher carefully brushing away sediment from a fragile skull. The anticipation of uncovering a new species hanging in the air. It's a painstaking process requiring patience, precision, and a bit of luck. Modern technology has revolutionized these studies. CT scans let scientists peer inside fossils without breaking them, revealing brain size and inner ear structures that hint at vocal capabilities. This ties directly into theories about the singing lemur's unique calls. There's a fringe, but captivating idea. Some researchers speculate that the structure of these lemurs' vocal apparatus might have allowed them to mimic other species or environmental sounds, a kind of natural sound camouflage in the dense forest. You also learn about interdisciplinary work, how geneticists, ecologists, and ethnographers collaborate, blending DNA analysis with oral histories and ecological modeling to build a fuller picture. Still, many mysteries remain unsolved. For example, the exact causes of extinction for some species are unclear, as is the question of whether climate shifts or human activity played the dominant role in certain regions. This scientific detective story continues to evolve with each new discovery, reminding you that history is not static but a living, breathing pursuit. And as your eyes grow heavy, you can almost hear the echoes of those ancient lemur songs in the lab, whispering their secrets across time. You now drift toward the surprising ways the legacy of the singing lemurs influences modern science, technology, and even art, a ripple effect that reaches far beyond Madagascar's forests. Here's a grounded fact. Biologists study lemur vocalizations to better understand primate communication, and this research informs everything from wildlife conservation to robotics. A quirky tidbit: some engineers have used the patterns of lemur calls as inspiration for developing more natural-sounding alerts in AI voice assistants and robots. So, in a way, the lemurs' ancient songs are helping to teach Siri and Alexa how to speak more like us. Historians and technologists still debate the ethics and implications of biomimicry in technology, whether mimicking animal behaviors risks reducing nature to a resource for human convenience, or whether it can foster deeper respect and preservation. You imagine a sleek robotics lab where a machine emits gentle lemur-inspired calls to communicate with other robots or soothe stressed humans. It's a strange but beautiful convergence of biology and technology. Meanwhile, artists continue to find inspiration in the lemurs' haunting melodies and elegant movements. Some contemporary composers integrate recorded lemur calls into ambient music, creating soundscapes that echo the lost forests. There's even a quirky trend of lemur-inspired yoga classes and meditation sessions, where participants are guided to breathe and move in rhythms, mimicking the natural calls and gestures of these primates. Yet the most profound influence might be in how these extinct animals remind us of the fragility of life and the urgency of conservation. Museums and exhibitions worldwide use their stories to educate and inspire visitors, turning extinction into a call for action rather than just sorrow. One ongoing scholarly discussion is whether highlighting the stories of extinct species helps or hinders conservation. Does it motivate people or leave them feeling powerless? As you listen to this, you feel the threads connecting past and present nature and technology, laws and creativity, a complex tapestry woven by the legacy of those long-gone singers. And as your mind drifts, you realize that their influence, much like their songs, continues to resonate softly but persistently through the modern world. As you near the end of this journey, your thoughts settle on the lessons the singing lemurs leave behind, a quiet reminder that every creature, no matter how small or seemingly obscure, holds a story worth telling and a song worth remembering. Here's a clear fact. The extinction of the giant singing lemurs is often cited as a cautionary tale, illustrating the consequences of habitat destruction and human interference on delicate ecosystems. A charming yet poignant detail. Some conservationists advocate for rewilding projects where native species are reintroduced to restore ecological balance. Although no one's yet proposed bringing back the singing lemurs, they remain a symbol of what can be lost without care. Historians and ecologists still debate the best ways to balance human development with wildlife preservation, recognizing that the challenge is as much about human values and choices as about science. You imagine yourself standing on a quiet Malagasy hillside at dusk, the air filled with the rustling of leaves and faint calls of living lemurs. The silence of the giants feels like a gentle urging to listen more closely, to tread more lightly, and to protect what remains. There's a gentle irony here. The singing lemurs, lost to time and poor rhythm, now teach us through their silence. They remind us that extinction is not just an ending, but a story still unfolding, one in which we all have a role. Maybe their greatest gift is the invitation to slow down, to notice the subtle melodies in nature, and to appreciate the fragile beauty of life's chorus before it fades. And so, as your eyes grow heavy and your breath slows, you carry the memory of their songs not as ghosts, but as gentle reminders echoing softly in the stillness.